Chapter 1794. In the secret chamber of the stronghold, Hu Dequan's voice sounded slowly. In the past few months, a new force seems to have emerged in this world and is targeting St. Blood Peak. St. Blood Peak's operations have been foiled several times and they have suffered great losses. Where did this force come from? Yang Ling frowned. Hu Dequan was usually in charge of dealing with external affairs. Usually he would either cultivate or sleep to maintain his battle prowess. This was because he was the strongest person in the Red Talisman Association. He had 2 red talismans in his hand, and it could be said that he was the trump card against the Sacred Blood Mountain. In the past, he had been the one to step forward and restrain Blazing Heaven in the Black Abyss. So when he heard Hu Dequan say that a new force had appeared in this world, Yang Ling was very confused. For so many years, this world had maintained the situation of 2 major forces fighting against each other. They had long been used to it. How could a third party suddenly appear? Hu Dequan said, "It's from Black Prison Cliff. It seems to be an organization formed by those loose cultivators." An organization formed by loose cultivators. Yang Ling was even more surprised. They can cause St. Blood Peak to suffer losses? Hu Dequan nodded. So I also don't understand what's going on. It was not that he looked down on those loose cultivators. It was undeniable that there were a few of them with decent strength. If they had not been corroded by the blood rain early on and been tainted with the divine nature, the Red Talisman Association would definitely think of ways to rope them in. But because they had suffered losses in the past, the Red Talisman Association did not dare to accept those cultivators with the divine nature. They also could not waste their energy to deal with them, so they could only leave them alone. However, Hu Dequan was the first one who didn't believe that these people could make the Sacred Blood Peak suffer losses. Those scattered cultivators generally hadn't been in this world for too long, so in terms of holiness, they were weaker than the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Peak. Once they fought with the Sacred Blood Peak, they would definitely be suppressed in terms of holiness. But this was the information he had gathered. Meng Su nodded. "I've heard about this too. It said that several teams of St. Blood Peak that were carrying out missions outside were completely wiped out. Only a few people managed to escape." Yang Ling's face was full of surprise. These loose practitioners are really something. He then frowned. But why are they doing this? Logically speaking, the only way out for these independent cultivators was to side with St. Blood Peak because the Red Talisman Association would absolutely not accept them. Yet now, not only had they not sided with St. Blood Peak, they'd banded together to go against St. Blood Peak instead. Are they tired of living? Hu Dequan pondered and said, "I'm guessing that someone might want to replace Blazing Heaven." Yang Ling was startled. There are actually people with such ambitions among those wandering cultivators? If there were, they would have shown themselves long ago, and would not have taken action only recently. Meng Su suddenly asked, "Do you still remember that little brother?" A young face immediately appeared in their minds. After all, it was something that happened a few months ago. How could they not remember? The changes in this world seem to have happened after this person arrived. Could this be his doing? Meng Su guessed. Yang Ling frowned and said, "He is just a middle-stage moon jade. How can he have such ability? There are a few late-stage moon jade cultivators among those wandering cultivators. Even if he has the deterrence of the Red Talisman Association, how can he subdue those wandering cultivators? And even make them risk their lives for him in St. Blood Peak?" But the timing is a little too coincidental. The timing was indeed coincidental, but none of them believed that it was that little brother who had united the rogue cultivators to fight against the St. Blood Mountain. "I'm going to find an opportunity to get in touch with Black Prison Cliff and see what's going on," Hu Dequan said. Although the Red Talisman Association could not accept those cultivators who were tainted by divine nature, they could still cooperate with the enemy of their enemy. Black Prison Cliff and St. Blood Peak already had irreconcilable conflicts. Even if there were no benefits for the Red Talisman Association to get in touch with them, there would be no harm. "That's possible." Meng Su nodded. "But we still have to be careful. Maybe this is a trick by St. Blood Peak. Even if it isn't, they might not be on the same side as us. I'll be careful." Hu Dequan sighed. A new battle for supremacy in Black Abyss is in another half a year. I wonder if we'll be able to hold on this time. In the battle for supremacy in Black Abyss, it had always been Saint Blood Peak that occupied the advantage, and the Red Talisman Association was able to hold on bitterly because of the might of the Red Talisman Association. But after so many years, the Red Talisman Association had been using less and less. Presently, they still had a few red talismans that they could utilize, but once all of them were exhausted, then they wouldn't have the ability to resist any longer. If they wanted to struggle on while at death's door, then they would have to obtain more red talismans from Mount Innerheart. Their expressions were slightly helpless when the battle for supremacy in Black Abyss was mentioned, and they truly didn't know when such days would come to an end. Amidst this silence, a voice suddenly sounded out from above. Because of the thick layer of earth, the voice was slightly illusory and indistinct, but it still entered clearly into their ears. Fellow Taoists, can you show yourself? The expressions of Hu Dequan and the others changed, and they glanced at each other as they realized the severity of the problem. The base of the Red Talisman Association has been exposed. This undoubtedly caused them to be extremely terrified, but fortunately, it wasn't Saint Blood Peak that came to look for them, and it was a slightly familiar voice instead. It was precisely that little brother they'd spoken about earlier. After a short moment of hesitation, the three of them made a decision. Since Saint Blood Peak had already come looking for them, they were definitely unable to avoid him. They had to figure out how this little brother knew the exact location of this base, and they had to figure out the reason he'd come. If it was possible, it was best if they could make him stay here, otherwise, the location of this base would be exposed to Saint Blood Peak one day. After a short while, energy rose and fell within a concealed cave while the grand formation droned, and then Hu Dequan's figure was revealed. They usually traveled to and from the base via teleportation formations, and there was more than one such formation. Hu Dequan had undoubtedly made an appearance by himself with the intention of making Lu Yi lower his guard, and then the other cultivators of the Red Talisman Association would appear from other formations and completely encircle Lu Yi. There was no problem with the Red Talisman Association's plan, but when Hu Dequan arrived at Lu Ye's location, he couldn't help but be stunned. Because when he looked over, Lu Yi wasn't the only one there. With him in the lead, there were over 10 figures standing behind him. Most of them looked extremely familiar, and even if they hadn't interacted with them, they'd seen them from afar. Obviously, they were those cultivators that were scattered outside. Were these rogue cultivators really united by him? In that case, the actions against the Sacred Blood Mountain in the past few months were also led by Lu Yi? Even though Hu Dequan had thought of this before, he was still shocked when he saw it with his own eyes. He didn't know what kind of means Lu Yi had to be able to gather such a force in such a short time. Moreover, looking at the attitude of those rogue cultivators, they seemed to be quite respectful to him. This was going to be troublesome. They'd originally thought that Lu Yi had come alone and wanted to keep him here, but now there were more than 10 people on the other side, and there were as many as 4 of them in the late stage of the Moon Jade Realm. How could the Red Talisman Association keep him here? It wasn't that they couldn't keep him here, but if they forcefully made a move, both sides would only suffer. It could even be said that if they made a big commotion and were discovered by the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain, the consequences would be even more severe. Thinking of this, Hu Dequan hurriedly urged the Sound Talisman and sent a message out, telling Yang Ling and Meng Su, who were approaching from other routes, to stay calm. He didn't see any hostility from Lu Yi, so he wanted to figure out the other party's intentions first. "Brother, we meet again." Lu Yi looked at Hu Dequan. Hu Dequan's expression was complicated, and he sighed slightly. "Brother, what are you up to?" He'd suddenly brought a group of people here, and directly found the most hidden base of the Red Talisman Association. No matter how one looked at it, they didn't seem to have good intentions, but they didn't seem to have any hostility. This made Hu Dequan very confused. "I'm just here to give you a heads up." Lu Yi looked at him with a sincere expression. "Your base has been exposed, and the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain are on their way to encircle and annihilate you, so you'd better pack up and leave." It had to be said that the Red Talisman Association's base was hidden very well. It hadn't been discovered for so many years, and it provided the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association with the strength to persist. However, the sacred blood mountain wasn't to be trifled with. Blazing Heaven had always wanted to find this base, and he'd spent a lot of effort and manpower to do so. A few days ago, he'd finally made a discovery. Lu Yi knew about this because of the spies he'd planted in the sacred blood mountain. Otherwise, with his background in this world, it would be impossible for him to find this place. Hearing this, Hu Dequan's expression changed drastically. Where did you get this information from? Lu Yi looked at him and didn't explain. I was able to find this place. Does fellow Taoist still not understand? Hu Dequan's expression was uncertain. He instinctively felt that Lu Yi had informed the sacred blood mountain, but after thinking about it carefully, he didn't think that was possible. The two sides had been fighting fiercely in the past few months, and the sacred blood mountain had suffered a few losses. It was impossible for Lu Yi to do such a thing. Moreover, Lu Yi wouldn't have informed the sacred blood mountain and then come to remind them. Fellow Taoist, I understand the rules of recruiting people, but sometimes it's not a good thing to stick to the rules. In the face of a common enemy, only by working together can we find a way out. That's all I have to say. Farewell. Saying so, Lu Yi turned around and was about to leave. Hu Dequan's expression changed. On one hand, he was shocked by the information he'd received, but on the other hand, he was conflicted by Lu Ye's words. Suddenly, he raised his hand and said, "Wait." Lu Yi stopped and turned to look at him. Hu Dequan said, "How about we exchange notes?" He had planned to go to Black Prison Cliff to get in touch with these loose cultivators, and now that they'd taken the initiative to come to him, he naturally went with the flow. Okay. Lu Yi flicked his finger, sending a note flying out. After a short while, they exchanged notes. Only then did Lu Yi lead his subordinates into a sea of blood and rush into the distance. They could no longer stay at Black Prison Cliff. While the sacred blood mountain was making a move here, they had also sent many cultivators to Black Prison Cliff. The sacred blood mountain had been deeply involved in this world for many years, so they were quite well informed. In the past few months, the sacred blood mountain had made several heavy moves against the sacred blood mountain, so it was impossible for them to be unaware of the source of the problem. The blood moon was approaching, and the first-generation vampires' strength would increase significantly. The sacred blood mountain clearly wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to attack the Red Talisman Association's stronghold and kick away the Black Prison Cliff, eliminating these two hidden dangers in one fell swoop. End of chapter. Chapter 1795. After Lu Yi learned that Sacred Blood Peak had dispatched troops to Black Prison Cliff, he immediately left with Xiang Yin and the others. It wasn't that he was afraid. According to the information he received, Sacred Blood Peak had dispatched over 20 Yu Yao cultivators to deal with Black Prison Cliff. Their numbers were much greater than his side, but if they really fought, Sacred Blood Peak's side would be the ones to suffer. After all, the suppression of Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature was something these first-generation blood race cultivators couldn't ignore. Not to mention himself, even Xiang Yin and the others had far more Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature than their enemies. Even so, Lu Yi wasn't confident he could exterminate these invaders. After all, they were all Yu Yao cultivators, so who knew what kind of mysterious methods they had? Once his own information was exposed, it would definitely attract Blazing Heaven's attention, which would be detrimental to his next plan. If things went wrong, Blazing Heaven might personally take action. He planned to keep his Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature a secret before fighting Blazing Heaven. Only then would he be able to catch Blazing Heaven off guard. Although Sacred Blood Peak knew that his Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature was very strong due to Xiang Yin's tip-off, they didn't know how strong it was because they hadn't truly felt it and couldn't imagine it. Lu Yi didn't want to fight Blazing Heaven at this time because even if he defeated him with his Sacred Blood Peak, he wouldn't be able to exterminate him. The battle for Black Abyss half a year later was a very good choice. Black Abyss was the battlefield he had chosen. Due to these considerations, Lu Yi decided to abandon Black Prison Cliff and bring his subordinates away. He also wanted to sell a favor to the Red Talisman Society and let them know that he was someone they could cooperate with. Ri Zhao was undoubtedly very strong, but before they fought, Lu Yi didn't know if he was Blazing Heaven's match. If he could cooperate with the Red Talisman Society, it would undoubtedly increase his chances of winning. The sea of blood surged forward, enveloping all the cultivators on his side. Lu Yi quickly received a message from Hu Dequan. There was nothing else in the message other than a place to hide. The Red Talisman Society had been fighting a battle of wits and courage with Sacred Blood Peak for many years. Even though their strength was far inferior, they had never been exterminated because they relied on their ability to hide. It could be said that the Red Talisman Association possessed countless concealed strongholds in this world, and Hu Dequan had revealed one of them to Lu Yi. On one hand, it was to repay Lu Yi's kindness and to thank Lu Yi for the information he provided earlier, and on the other hand he was probably probing Lu Yi. Lu Yi kept saying that he was someone he could cooperate with. Since that was the case, then he should give him a place to hide. If he dared to go, then there was no doubt that he was sincere in cooperating. If he didn't dare to go, then he must be hiding something. There was nothing Lu Yi didn't dare to do. He was worried about where to hide, so he immediately sent a message of thanks and led his men to the location of the stronghold. The haze in the sky gradually thinned, and the blood moon showed signs of appearing. At the same time, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were retreating hastily. Even though they didn't know if the information provided by Lu Yi was reliable, they would rather believe it than not. Especially when Lu Yi had already found the base. Of course, after retreating, Hu Dequan and the others still hid in the distance to investigate the situation. 2 days later, a large number of cultivators from the Saint Blood Mountain found this place and began to bombard it without any explanation. Hu Dequan and the others' eyelids twitched as they secretly rejoiced at Lu Yi's warning. Otherwise, even if the Red Talisman Association wasn't destroyed this time, it would suffer heavy losses. When the Battle of Black Abyss began half a year later, they would no longer have the ability to resist. At this time, Lu Yi was in a mountain valley, looking up at the blood moon and prying into its mysteries. Since coming to the inner world, Lu Yi had been condensing his own blood except when the blood moon was in the sky. So far, this was already the 3rd time the blood moon had appeared in the sky. The progress of the Blood Eye Spirit rune was pretty good, and Lu Yi estimated that he should be able to complete it after 2 more times. According to the pattern of the blood moon's appearance, he would definitely have 2 chances in half a year. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility of an accident. But Lu Yi couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't control the timing of the blood moon's appearance, so he could only wait. For the next period of time, the Red Talisman Association would be completely dormant. With their base destroyed, they would lose the spirit plants they had painstakingly cultivated. From now on, they would no longer have any resources they could use. Although Lu Yi had given them a batch of spirit plants before, they wouldn't be able to last for long. Therefore, the Red Talisman Association felt very anxious and decided to fight the Saint Blood Mountain in the next Battle of Black Abyss. If they missed this opportunity, the Red Talisman Association's situation would become more and more difficult in the future. Because of this, the Red Talisman Association began to take the initiative to contact Lu Yi more frequently. Because from the past, they could determine Lu Yi's position against the Saint Blood Mountain. Coupled with the fact that time waited for no man, they had no other choice but to join forces with Lu Yi. This was undoubtedly Lu Yi's wish. After coming to this world, he initially wanted to integrate into the Red Talisman Association and fight the Saint Blood Mountain together with them, but because of some twists and turns, he didn't get to do so. He understood the choice of Hu Dequan and the others at that time and didn't feel resentful because he couldn't explain the secret of the talent tree to others. Although the process was a little complicated, the result could be considered to be satisfactory. Looking at it this way, his method of gathering the rogue cultivators was correct because without this force, the Red Talisman Association might not have paid attention to him. The greatest harvest Lu Yi obtained from the Red Talisman Association was all kinds of information about the Battle of Black Abyss. The more he learned about this matter, the more certain he was that choosing to fight Blazing Heaven in the Black Abyss was a wise decision. In the secret area of the stronghold, Lu Yi was condensing his own treasure blood when a sound talisman suddenly vibrated. He took it out to investigate, thinking that it was Hu Dequan who had contacted him. Recently, their relationship could be said to be growing day by day. After discarding the inherent concept of rejection, Hu Dequan found that Lu Yi was worthy of a deep friendship, so he would often send him a message to discuss some matters. Currently, The relationship between the two parties was very close. They were just short of staying together. However, there would still be occasional interactions between the two parties. They got along very well. But after investigating the sound talisman, Lu Yi discovered that the one who contacted him was not Hu Dequan, but ghost cultivator Zhou Tianbao. "Sir, I've been exposed. This subordinate will fight to the death. In addition, please be careful. Blazing Heaven has been in seclusion cultivating a secret technique and seems to have reached the minor accomplishment stage." After checking the information in the sound talisman, Lu Yi lowered his eyes slightly. He had expected that Zhou Tianbao would be exposed. Ever since he gathered many rogue cultivators, he began to target Sacred Blood Peak and destroyed several squads that went out to carry out missions. Before this, Sacred Blood Peak's encirclement of the Red Talisman Association and Black Prison Cliff had failed. As long as the cultivators of Sacred Blood Peak weren't fools, they would definitely be able to guess that there was a problem within their stronghold. Otherwise, the enemy wouldn't have moved in advance. After realizing that there was a problem within their stronghold, Sacred Blood Peak would inevitably investigate. Once such a situation occurred, Zhou Tianbao would be exposed sooner or later. This was because during this period of time, all the information about Sacred Blood Peak had been leaked by him. If Sacred Blood Peak followed the clues, there was no way Zhou Tianbao would be able to escape. Lu Yi had previously asked him to inquire about Blazing Heaven's situation because there was something he was very concerned about. Recently, Blazing Heaven had been doing something and hadn't shown himself. Even when the Red Talisman Association's stronghold was targeted, Blazing Heaven still hadn't appeared. Zhou Tianbao had clearly discovered something. It could even be said that Blazing Heaven's secret technique had reached the minor accomplishment stage that allowed him to discover Zhou Tianbao's betrayal. Secret technique? Lu Yi immediately thought of the Blood Eye Spirit Rune. When the Blood Moon was in the sky, the Spirit Rune hidden within the Blood Moon wasn't a secret. If he could pry into it, other cultivators would naturally be able to pry into it as well. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had once studied the Blood Moon and faintly felt that the Spirit Rune hidden within the strange Blood Moon was related to a secret technique. However, they couldn't find a way to enter it and could only helplessly give up. As for observing the Spirit Rune itself, the Blood Eye Spirit Rune was simply too complicated. No matter how outstanding a Spirit Rune master was, it was impossible to completely construct this Spirit Rune. If it weren't for Lu Ye's talent tree, he wouldn't have wasted this time. The Battle of the Black Abyss in the New World was about to begin, and Blazing Heaven's secret technique had reached the minor accomplishment stage. This wasn't good news. When Lu Yi tried to contact Zhou Tianbao again, the sound talisman couldn't be transmitted. This undoubtedly meant that Zhou Tianbao was dead. Moreover, through the perception of his own sacred blood, Lu Yi couldn't detect any traces of Zhou Tianbao, the Blood Warrior. It was a pity. Lu Yi had also thought about whether or not he should let Zhou Tianbao leave Sacred Blood Peak in advance, but in the end he didn't do so. This was because Zhou Tianbao wasn't the only spy he had planted in Sacred Blood Peak. Every time Xiang Yin and the others went out to carry out a mission, he would give them a jade box so they could use it at their discretion. Sealed in that jade box was none other than the blood treasure he had painstakingly condensed. Zhou Tianbao had to die. Only with his death could Sacred Blood Peak relax their vigilance and protect the other spies. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi sent a message to Hu Dequan, informing him that Blazing Heaven had come out of seclusion. The Red Talisman Association and its people needed to lay low even more thoroughly. After Blazing Heaven came out of seclusion, he would definitely make a move. Once he found any clues, there would inevitably be many casualties. All of this was to accumulate strength for the final battle of the Black Abyss. Lu Yi had distributed a large number of resources just so that the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association could maintain their strongest strength at all times. Half a year passed by in a flash. In a secret room of the stronghold, Lu Yi sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. His divine sense constantly surged like a tide. Under his inner vision, the leaves of the talent tree were burning fiercely. Some of the leaves that were originally blank were now densely packed with yin and yang elements that were intertwined with each other. As his spiritual sense surged, even more yin and yang elements began to spread out in all directions. Lu Yi was currently inscribing blood eye spirit runes on the talent tree. After observing the blood moon for the third time half a year ago, he had waited for another 2 months before the blood moon appeared again. Lu Yi still hadn't been able to observe it completely. After waiting for several more months, it wasn't until a few days ago that he was able to observe the blood moon for the last time. End of chapter. Chapter 1796. Many yin and yang elements were intertwined with each other, covering the leaves. Lu Yi's mind was immersed in it, meticulous. This was the most complex spirit pattern Lu Yi had come into contact with so far. Compared to it, it wasn't even worthy of carrying his shoes. He had to ensure that the construction process went smoothly without the slightest mistake, otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. The magical characteristics of the talent tree itself gave him the possibility of completing this task. If he were to construct this spirit pattern on a jade board, Lu Yi estimated that he would have failed long ago. After a few days, when the last element was successfully constructed, the blood eye spirit pattern was truly completed. Looking inside, an obvious eye pattern appeared on the dense leaves of the talent tree. This pattern was pieced together by leaves and occupied a large area. Looking from a distance, it was as if the talent tree had grown an eye. The lines inside the eye crisscrossed, and if one looked carefully, they would find an inverted triangle pattern in the pupil, which looked extremely strange. Lu Yi was very curious about the use of this spirit pattern. When the demonic eye blinked, if a cultivator was in the outside world, their spirit sea would be eroded by this demonic eye and suspended in the air. This demonic eye had an illusory effect on cultivators, and under the influence of this demonic eye, a cultivator's state of mind would be greatly shaken and become easily irritable. In serious cases, they might even lose control of themselves. But if a cultivator was in the inner world, their strength would obviously increase when the blood moon hung in the sky. But according to Lu Yi's speculation, this was the work of the blood ancestors Saint Blood. In other words, whether it was the demonic eye imprinted in a cultivator's spirit sea or the blood moon suspended in this world, they were all manifestations of the blood ancestors Saint Blood in different environments. Even if he saw the blood eye spirit pattern, its power should not be comparable to the demonic eye spirit pattern. It might even have a completely different effect because he was not the blood ancestor. He had to find someone to test it out. Thinking of this, Lu Yi sent out a message and called the Xiang sisters. More than 10 days passed in a flash. On this day, Lu Yi was meditating when a note vibrated. He picked it up and found that it was a message from Hu Dequan. The time had come, the struggle of the Black Abyss was about to begin. Unknowingly, it had already been a year since he arrived in this world. According to the information he currently possessed, if he wanted to completely defeat the Saint Blood Mountain, he could only do so in the battlefield of the Black Abyss. If he failed this time, then he could only wait for another 10 years. 10 years might not be a long time for other Yu Yao, but it was a long time for Lu Yi. Therefore, in this battle, they could only win and not lose. He stood up, activated his divine sense, and walked out of the secret room he was in. Soon he arrived outside. Numerous figures appeared around him. They were none other than the dozen or so cultivators he had subdued earlier. Most of them were Yu Yao, and there were 2 or 3 star mansions mixed in with them. All of them had uneasy expressions on their faces. They didn't say much. After months of preparation, everyone had been waiting for this day to come. Set off. Lu Yi took the lead and walked to the side. Many cultivators followed closely behind. After a short while, a transmission array that had been set up ahead of time began to shine. This hidden stronghold began to disperse. A day later, in another hidden place, Lu Yi led his subordinates and waited quietly. After a short while, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Lu Yi, who had his eyes closed, turned his head and immediately saw several familiar faces. Not only that, but a few concealed auras also began to appear around him. Hu Dequan, Yang Ling, and Meng Su stood not far from Lu Yi and looked at each other. After a long while, Hu Dequan said with a serious expression, "Brother Lu, we can trust you, right?" Even though the Red Talisman Association had been in contact with the Red Talisman Association for several months now, They still found it hard to feel at ease now that things had come to this point. If Lu Ye's subordinates were arranged by blazing heaven, and they were so close to them, then they would definitely suffer a crushing defeat in this battle. Even though, from what they had seen, this possibility was not high. You don't seem to have any other choice, Lu Yi said. Hu Dequan smiled bitterly. This was the most difficult part of the Red Talisman Association. Meng Su said, "Actually, I've always had a question. I wonder if you can answer it?" Lu Yi looked at him. "What is it? Ask away." Meng Su said, "Fellow Taoist, you're only at the Moon Jade intermediate stage, so how did you manage to recruit so many cultivators with higher cultivation bases? They seem to be extremely loyal to you." Meng Su had discovered this before, and he had also tried to ask Xiang Yin and the others about it. Unfortunately, he had never received an answer, so he was very confused. For cultivators, strength was always the most important thing. Lu Ye's subordinates were all at the Moon Jade late stage, and their cultivation bases were higher than his, so why did they have to listen to him? In the past, he didn't ask Lu Yi directly. After all, this was his secret, and it wasn't good to pry. However, with the imminent battle, he had to get to the bottom of this. Even if they could trust Lu Yi, whether or not Lu Ye's subordinates could be trusted was another matter altogether. It would be bad if some of his subordinates betrayed him when the battle started. Lu Yi pondered for a moment before saying, "There are two types of blood tribe cultivators. The first type is ordinary blood tribe cultivators, and the second type is blood tribe cultivators who have obtained holy blood and possess holy nature. The latter can condense precious blood, which has countless uses. They can be bestowed upon other blood tribe cultivators and taken in as blood servants. The blood servants will naturally be loyal to their blood master." Meng Su frowned. "So Xiang Yin and the others are your blood servants? But fellow Taoist, you've only been in this world for a short time. In terms of holy nature, shouldn't they be more powerful than you?" "I already possessed holy nature before coming to this world. Xiang Yin and the others are inferior to me." Meng Su was confused. "Then are you a human or a blood tribe cultivator?" "I am a human, and the holy nature of the blood tribe is only one of my powers. It won't affect me in the slightest." Meng Su didn't say anything. It wasn't clear whether he believed Lu Yi, but he understood the doubts in his heart. Xiang Yin and the others were actually blood servants? Hu Dequan said, "All right, now that things have come to this, there's no turning back." He gazed deeply at Lu Yi. "Brother, I hope you won't disappoint us." "I won't." Hu Dequan turned his head and looked around. Then he shouted in a low voice, "Let's begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association who were hiding in the surroundings walked out one by one. There weren't many of them, only about 30 of them. Including Lu Yi and the others, there were only about 40 of them. This was the team that the Red Talisman Association had painstakingly accumulated over the countless years. They were also the only people they could use. The cultivators of both sides gathered in one place. Hu Dequan raised his hand and a red light bloomed on his fingertip. A violent and ferocious aura spread out. Not only him, but Yang Ling and Zhang Su also did the same. The three of them activated the power of the Red Talisman together, causing the void to tremble. Lu Yi quietly watched from the side. He had obtained a lot of information about the Battle of the Black Abyss from the Red Talisman Association. Of course, he knew that Hu Dequan and the others weren't really activating the Red Talisman. Instead, they were using the power of the Red Talisman as a guide. If Lu Yi wasn't wrong, the target of the guidance should be the consciousness of the inner world. As expected, as the power of the Red Talisman continued to spread out, a small black dot suddenly appeared in the middle of the three. When it first appeared, it was almost imperceptible. But in an instant, the small black dot expanded in all directions with a loud bang. None of them made any movements to dodge. In an instant, the vision of many cultivators darkened, and they felt as if their bodies were weightless. When they came back to their senses, they were no longer where they were originally. Lu Yi looked around and felt a strange sense of familiarity at a glance. Countless floating meteorites shuttled through the void, and floating continents of various sizes stretched across the void. This environment was surprisingly the same as the one he was in when he participated in the Battle of the Black Abyss on Mount Fengsuan. The so-called Black Abyss was indeed no different from the space he entered back then. Lu Yi didn't know if it was the same Black Abyss. It was most likely not, because the Battle of the Black Abyss happened once every 10 years. Although the cycle of the Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss was much longer, if it was really the same Black Abyss, there would definitely be a time when they interacted. If that was really the case, when a large group of unfamiliar Yu Yao suddenly appeared during the Battle of the Black Abyss, the situation would definitely be difficult to deal with. But after so many years, the three Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss had never encountered such a situation. Lu Yi was more inclined to believe that this was another space, but it was more or less the same as the one he had been to before. The only difference was that there was a bright ray of light coming from not far away. Turning his head, he saw a small sun-like sphere emitting light. Upon closer inspection, he even saw a hazy blood-red color on the surface of the sphere. "Move, everyone move quickly!" Hu Dequan shouted. He took the lead and rushed in the direction of the small sun. The others followed closely behind. Xiang Yin and the others gathered around Lu Yi. They looked at him, waiting for his instructions. "Follow the plan," Lu Yi instructed. Then, he led his people and followed behind the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association. The so-called plan was nothing more than to assist the Red Talisman Association. After a short while, more than 40 people gathered around the small sun. Each of them stood solemnly. Hu Dequan looked in the direction of Lu Yi and the others and said solemnly, "Brother Lu, although I've talked with you through transmission before, I still have to tell you in detail. The so-called Battle of the Black Abyss is a battle to protect the origin. The origin was what the Red Talisman Association called the small sun. The origin was the origin of the inner world. Moreover, the origin did indeed have its own consciousness. Lu Yi had already confirmed this when he chatted with Hu Dequan before. Previously, the consciousness of the inner world would communicate with the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association and give them some guidance and help. But as time passed, this consciousness became quieter and quieter. Many times, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association couldn't get any response from it. The fundamental reason was the layer of blood red that covered the origin. Lu Yi could clearly sense an extremely terrifying divine nature from that layer of blood red. That blood red color was undoubtedly the power of the blood ancestors' precious blood. The precious blood was eroding the origin, and the origin had always been resisting it. Therefore, it was always in a quiet state. Only during the Battle of the Black Abyss would the origin's consciousness be guided by the might of the Red Talisman Association and bring the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association here. Chapter 1797. In fact, the initial cycle of the Battle of the Black Abyss wasn't once every 10 years, but once every 100 years. However, as time passed, the cycle became shorter and shorter until it became once every 10 years in recent years. This was the hiding place of the origin consciousness, so the shortening of the cycle of the Battle of the Black Abyss undoubtedly meant that the origin consciousness was in a bad situation. And from the current situation, it seemed that the blood ancestors' treasured blood's corrosion of the origin consciousness was beginning to bear fruit. If this continued, even if the Red Talisman Association cultivators could bitterly hold on, the origin consciousness wouldn't be able to hold on. Once the origin consciousness was completely devoured by the treasured blood, there would be no place for the Red Talisman Association cultivators in this world. We're at a disadvantage against the Sacred Blood Peak because they outnumber us and have sunshine. But as the defending side, we also have an advantage because we arrived here in advance with the help of the origin consciousness, giving us enough time to make some preparations. Hu Dequan's voice continued to resound. This was also the biggest reason why the Red Talisman Association was able to hold on despite being at a disadvantage in terms of numbers and overall strength. Every time the Battle of the Black Abyss occurred, they would arrive here in advance and make some defensive arrangements. In the end, the origin consciousness was the origin consciousness of the core world, so it could naturally use its authority to make things easier for the cultivators on its side. Therefore, the current situation was that the Red Talisman Association cultivators arrived here first, and after some time, the sacred blood peak cultivators would be able to open a passage to this place. How long this delay would be depended on how long the origin consciousness could hold on, because the sacred blood peak cultivators were opening the passage to this place to break the origin consciousness's seal on this space. Therefore, we need to deploy some defensive measures as much as possible. Once the battle begins, our first task is to protect the origin consciousness and then kill the enemy. Once the battle begins, the origin consciousness will repel all enemies. As long as we can hold on long enough, the sacred blood peak cultivators will be expelled from this place, and only then will we be able to win. Hu Dequan had previously discussed this matter with Lu Yi, and he had also mentioned that this kind of rejection would weaken with the passage of time. In the beginning, the origin consciousness would only need a day or even half a day to expel the enemy from this space, but during the last battle of the Black Abyss, it took a full 5 days. This time, it would definitely take longer. No matter what, the reason for this was that the quintessence's control over this space was weakening, and this was undoubtedly disadvantageous to the Red Talisman Association that was on the defensive here. After a simple explanation of the true essence of the struggle of Black Abyss, many cultivators quickly took action. They had to make more arrangements before the cultivators of Saint Blood Peak arrived. One figure after another shuttled back and forth as a large number of asteroids and floating continents were transported back. Cultivators proficient in formations began to set up formations on these asteroids and floating continents. Lu Yi didn't immediately go to help. Instead, he flew towards the source of light. Back when Lu Yi was in the Magic Eye Spectacle, he had speculated that the inner world had its own consciousness. This was because the inner world had indeed shown a conscious reaction when it was rushing towards him. He had even tried to communicate with it, but unfortunately, he did not receive any response. In the end, he was swallowed by the inner world. After entering this world, Lu Yi had also repeatedly tried to communicate with the world's consciousness, but to no avail. Only today did he realize that the consciousness of the inner world had been hiding in this special space all this time. Naturally, it would not respond to his calls. But if this was the case, then what was the situation when the inner world was rushing towards him? At that time, the inner world had clearly acted on its own and was searching for him. In particular, when he was preparing to escape and sacrificing his precious blood, the inner world's reaction was especially strong. As he pondered, a hair-raising thought suddenly popped up in Lu Ye's mind. What if the consciousness of the inner world wasn't the quintessence at that time? In other words, the inner world's action of swallowing him into the inner world wasn't the result of the quintessence's consciousness, but another consciousness? It had swallowed him in because it had sensed that he had the bloodline of the blood race. After swallowing him, he could be of help to it. If this was the case, then the truth was somewhat terrifying. The situation the Red Talisman Association was facing was much more serious than he had imagined. Lu Ye's expression changed as he raised his hand to touch the source of light in front of him. Not far away, Hu Dequan coldly observed. Just now, he had seen Lu Yi flying towards the core source, but he didn't stop him. This was because he knew that any cultivator with a holy nature who approached the core source wouldn't have a good end. This had been confirmed in previous battles. Because of the layer of bloody light covering the core source, the holy nature seemed to be particularly strong. Any cultivator with a holy nature would find their strength suppressed the closer they got to the core source. But what shocked Hu Dequan was that Lu Yi didn't show any signs of being suppressed. When he touched the core source, Hu Dequan's eyes widened. What was going on? He couldn't understand because the scene in front of him had already surpassed his inherent understanding. What he could confirm was that Lu Yi had a holy nature, and a very strong one at that. But it shouldn't be strong enough to not be suppressed by that layer of bloody light. But such a strange thing had happened. He found it strange because he didn't understand what Lu Yi had said before. Lu Yi had told him that he had a holy nature and could even use all kinds of vampire secret arts at will. However, the holy nature was only one of his powers. Of course, this power would be suppressed by the bloody light outside the core source. After all, this was the power of the blood ancestors' precious blood, and its holy nature was far beyond Lu Ye's reach. However, not only did Lu Yi possess a holiness, but he was also a weapon cultivator of the human race. Standing there, he was indeed unable to activate his own holiness, and it was difficult for him to use the blood kindred's secret arts. However, his powers were not affected at all. If it were Xiang Yin, she probably wouldn't even be able to get close to the core source. Hu Dequan saw that the situation wasn't right and was about to step forward to stop it, but in the next moment, his eyes widened. Because as Lu Ye's hand came into contact with the origin source, the hazy blood-red light covering the origin source began to undergo some strange changes. Originally, this blood-red light was like a shell that tightly wrapped around the origin source, but now it seemed to be boiling. At this moment, extremely tiny roots that could not be seen extended from Lu Ye's palm. In the blink of an eye, they wrapped around the enormous origin. Lu Yi had activated the power of the talent tree. If the core source was a cultivator, then the hazy bloody light was a foreign object that invaded the cultivator's body. It was like the curse power in the mermaid clan's bloodline, or the soul-devouring aphids in Yaya's divine sea. Lu Yi activated the power of the talent tree to try and see if he could burn away this layer of bloody light. In just a moment of contact, Lu Yi knew that it could be done. Because with the activation of the talent tree's power, the layer of bloody light was obviously showing some abnormal reactions. The bloody light turned into a bloody mist and seemed to be evaporating, and the color of the bloody light was slowly weakening. Hu Dequan finally came to and rushed in front of Lu Yi. He was surprised and doubtful. "Brother Lu, what are you doing?" He wanted to stop him because no matter what Lu Yi was doing, the core source couldn't be touched casually. If Lu Yi had evil intentions, then this battle would be lost without a fight. But after seeing the changes in the core with his own eyes, he realized that what Lu Yi was doing seemed to be a good thing for the core source. "I'll tell you later," Lu Yi replied and focused on activating the power of the talent tree. At this moment, he clearly felt that in the process of burning away the bloody light, some mysterious things were refined into his body through the roots of the talent tree. He felt that his own holiness was rapidly increasing. Originally, after coming to this world, he had bestowed a lot of precious blood, which had actually damaged his own holiness. But because his holiness was too strong, this damage was not very obvious. Compared to other blood kindred, he still had enough of an advantage to crush them with his holiness. If he wanted to replenish the lost holiness, then he could only refine more blood kindred's holy blood. He definitely couldn't find any blood kindred's holy blood for the time being, but he didn't want to wait for a huge replenishment here. While thinking, Lu Yi realized that this bloody light was the manifestation of the blood ancestors' holy blood. His original intention was to burn it away, so that it could reduce the pressure on the core's consciousness. Maybe it would be of some help to his side in the upcoming battle. But this burning process was equivalent to using the bloody light as a cultivation resource like spirit jade. In the process of refining the spirit jade, Lu Yi used the roots of the talent tree to probe into the spirit jade. While burning away the impurities, he also refined the energy of the spirit jade for his own use and strengthened his foundation. The current situation was that he had exchanged the spirit jade for this layer of bloody light. In essence, his current state was no different from normal cultivation. It was just that in this kind of cultivation, his cultivation would not increase, but his blood kindred's holiness would rapidly increase. Great nourishment. The holiness he had lost before was quickly replenished, and it was still increasing. Hu Dequan stood to the side and watched, becoming more and more certain that Lu Ye's actions were beneficial to the core. He no longer had any thoughts of stopping him and let him stay here while he began to preside over the various matters of constructing the defensive line. Lu Yi originally thought that he could quickly refine the layer of bloody light, but no matter how he refined it, the layer of bloody light showed no signs of weakening. But the growth of his holiness in his body was obvious. This allowed him to slowly understand one thing. The blood ancestors' holy blood was not just on the surface of the core, but also on the inside. This gave him the illusion that he could not completely refine it. If he had enough time, he should be able to return the core to its origin, but there was definitely not enough time, making it somewhat difficult for him to do so. Just as he was feeling helpless, he suddenly felt a force gently touching his divine sea's defenses, as if someone was knocking on his door. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and opened his divine sea, anxiously immersing himself in his soul avatar. Within the divine sea, Lu Yi looked up and saw that there was an additional figure here at a glance. A white-haired old man with a walking stick in his hand. He was very short, about the height of a 10-year-old child. His long beard hung down to his chest, and his forehead was bulging like a mountain. End of chapter. Chapter 1798. Looking at the figure of the little old man who had suddenly appeared in his divine sea, and thinking back to when his divine sea had been lightly touched, Lu Yi immediately realized the other party's identity, a source consciousness? If he was not mistaken, this little old man in front of him was an existence similar to Xiao Jiao and Huan Yang, a manifestation of a world domain's will. His divine sea's defenses being touched was undoubtedly the work of this old man. The little old man nodded lightly, yes. He then asked, the Dao tree bloodline? What? Lu Yi frowned, not understanding. The little old man gave Lu Yi a deep look and did not explain much, but Lu Yi clearly saw a look of dread in the other party's eyes, and he did not know if it was just his imagination. Just as he was about to ask something, the little old man seemed to have discovered a new world and stared at the 7-colored divine lotus at the foot of Lu Ye's soul avatar in surprise. Soul-warming lotus? Taking a closer look, he shook his head. No, it's just a soul avatar. Boy, what is your relationship with the soul race? I can barely be considered a half-clansman of the soul race, Lu Yi replied casually. The little old man's eyes twitched obviously. What was this? What did he mean by barely be considered a half-clansman of the soul race? If he was, then he was. If he wasn't, then he wasn't. But seeing that there was such a divine lotus in the other party's divine sea, he knew that his relationship with the soul race was not ordinary. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to have such a treasure guarding his divine sea. Just as he was contemplating though, Lu Yi said, Old Fong, the Battle of Black Abyss has begun, and it won't be long before the people from St. Blood Peak arrive. I want to use this battle to kill them all. What kind of help can Old Fong provide? The little old man was stunned for a moment before realizing that Old Fong had called him Old Fong because of the name Minuscule Mountain. No one had ever called him this before, so he was surprised for a moment, but he didn't care much about it. Hearing this, he slowly shook his head. My essence has been contaminated by the blood ancestors' precious blood. For many years, this old master has been fighting against it. If it weren't for your help today, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to come here to see you. Once the battle begins, all this old master can do is expel the invading enemy with all his strength. Lu Yi understood and was a little disappointed, but after thinking about it, he couldn't ask for too much. Fong Lao's origin had been contaminated by a portion of the blood ancestors' precious blood's power for so many years, and with his help today, Fong Lao's origin consciousness was able to relax for a moment. However, he definitely couldn't continue to relax like this. Elder Fong had sensed that Lu Yi was different from the others, so he had purposely shown himself to meet him. Therefore, in the Battle of the Black Abyss, he still had to rely on himself. Brat, don't think you can eat until you're fat. Win this battle first, and then help me resolve the danger of the source core. Only then can we plan for the future. Elder Fong's voice rang out. The danger of the source core had only been slightly weakened, but it hadn't been completely resolved. This wasn't something that could be accomplished in a single day. The source core that had been contaminated by a portion of the blood ancestors' precious blood's power was like suffering from an illness. As the saying goes, illness comes like a landslide, but it goes away like silk. From Elder Fong's point of view, it was unrealistic for Lu Yi to want to exterminate St. Blood Mountain in a single battle. This kind of thing could only be done slowly. Lu Yi frowned. He didn't want to plan for the future. Right now, he just wanted to settle everything with a single battle. After thinking for a moment, Lu Yi asked, Elder Fong, that blood ancestor's precious blood, does it have its own consciousness? The reason for this guess was naturally because of all the thoughts that had flashed through his mind before. If the consciousness that had swallowed him into this world wasn't Heart Mountain's consciousness, then there was only one other possibility. Elder Fong nodded and said, That's right, But don't worry too much. That consciousness isn't complete. It should have been born from the remnant will of the blood ancestors' precious blood. That's why its intelligence is a bit hazy, like a child that hasn't been born for long. Moreover, this is the source core space, so it can't enter. Only cultivators like you can enter. After obtaining a definite answer from Elder Fong, even though Lu Yi already had his suspicions, he was still shocked. He couldn't help but recall some information he had obtained when he first came into contact with the blood race's inheritance. It was rumored that the blood race's bloodline could be reborn from a single drop of blood. He had always felt that this kind of thing was too illusory, but now it seemed that he was just a frog at the bottom of a well. The blood ancestor had been dead for who knew how many years, and her remaining body had been split into many pieces. However, the drop of precious blood she had left behind had actually given birth to a consciousness. A single drop of the blood ancestor's precious blood had caused Heart Mountain's core consciousness to be in such a sorry state. Just how powerful had the blood ancestor been back then? And what kind of existence had been able to split the blood ancestor's body into pieces? Lu Yi couldn't think too deeply about this. Right now, because this consciousness was born from the remnant will of the blood ancestor, it must have inherited many things from the blood ancestor. Could this be considered a kind of rebirth? Elder Fong had said that the blood ancestor's drop of precious blood couldn't enter this place. As for the reason, Lu Yi didn't know, but since Elder Fong had said so, then it must be true. In other words, that drop of precious blood had always been outside. Lu Yi immediately thought of the blood moon hanging in the sky. He had always been curious about the essence of the blood moon and had once guessed it. Now that he heard Elder Fong's words, he was almost certain that the blood moon was formed from the blood ancestor's precious blood. However, Lu Yi quickly thought of another matter. Elder Fong, if the blood ancestor's precious blood couldn't enter, then how was the origin contaminated? Naturally, it was contaminated by the divine nature of the cultivators who died here. To put it bluntly, the divine nature is an extension of the blood ancestor's precious blood's power. The precious blood's ignorant will has always been its main goal to invade the origin, so all of the divine nature's power will automatically contaminate the origin. Lu Yi came to a realization. After generations of fighting in the Black Abyss, there must have been many cultivators from the Saint Blood Mountain who had died in battle. After that, the divine nature in their bodies dissipated and slowly contaminated the origin. So kid, do your best to win this battle. After that, this old man will work with you to find a way to deal with that drop of precious blood. If anyone else had come here, Elder Fong definitely wouldn't have appeared because it was meaningless. However, Lu Yi was different. The inheritance of the Dao Tree bloodline gave Elder Fong hope because to the Dao Tree bloodline, there was nothing in the world that it couldn't refine, including the blood ancestor's precious blood. Lu Yi nodded. I'll do my best. Within the divine sea, Elder Fong's figure dissipated. Lu Yi opened his eyes and pressed his hand on the origin, activating the talent tree's power and continuing to refine the power of the precious blood inside the origin. The more he refined, the lighter the pressure on the origin's consciousness would be. Everyone else was busy. Hu Dequan was overseeing everything and constantly issuing orders. There was a large space around the origin that was filled with layers of formations and killing intent. A few days later, the space suddenly began to tremble. Only then did Hu Dequan flash to Lu Ye's side. Brother, the people from the Saint Blood Mountain are coming. According to the plan, we have to hide the origin. Although this kind of concealment couldn't be maintained for too long and would be found by the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain sooner or later, as the defending side, stalling for time was undoubtedly a strategy. Lu Yi understood and retreated. Hu Dequan called out, and immediately several cultivators rushed over from the left and right, setting up a concealment formation near the origin. The space continued to vibrate for half a day before it finally stopped. Lu Yi, who was hiding on a meteorite and using the formation to conceal his aura, instantly sensed a powerful divine sense sweeping over from a certain direction. It was Rizhao's divine sense. If nothing went wrong, it must be Blazing Heaven himself. The cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain must have come out in full force. They were like this every time, but every time, they returned in defeat. This battle had lasted for countless years since ancient times. Amidst the silence of the void, murderous intent was hidden. Soon, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain scattered into small groups under Blazing Heaven's orders. The first thing they had to do was to find the exact location of the origin. Only then could they target it. In the process of searching, both sides were also competing. The main purpose of the Red Talisman Association was to stall for time, but under the premise that the general direction remained unchanged, it was also necessary to kill as many enemies as possible. In an instant, a sea of blood appeared in the origin space. Searching in all directions, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain hid in the sea of blood. On the meteorite, where Lu Yi was hiding, Hu Dequan was beside him with a nervous expression. "Brother, how confident are you?" In the past, at this stage, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association usually chose to hide as much as possible because their overall strength was inferior to others, and there was no advantage in taking the initiative to attack. Moreover, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain worked together to activate the Blood Sea technique, which could be used to attack and defend against enemies. It was really not easy to deal with. Unless the enemy happened to enter the range of the spirit array they had set up, they would use the power of the spirit array to launch an attack. However, the origin space was not small. Even if they entered a few days in advance, the number of spirit arrays they could set up was limited. It was completely dependent on luck to let the enemy enter the range of the spirit array. However, things were different this time. After a discussion with Hu Dequan, Lu Yi changed her previous strategy and chose a more radical approach. "Just wait," Lu Yi replied. In his perception, the position of all the blood warriors in the entire origin space was clear at a glance. This was a perception that came from his bloodline and not his divine sense, so the range of his perception was extremely wide. Hu Dequan was a little nervous. Although he had been persuaded by Lu Yi before, when it came to this step, he could not help but feel nervous. The Red Talisman Association did not have many people, so they could not bear too much trouble. In another space, the 6 members of the Red Talisman Association, Xiang Yin, and 2 other blood warriors accepted by Lu Yi were rushing in a direction without any concealment. Xiang Yin took the lead, holding their own spirit runes and constantly communicating with Lu Yi to determine the direction. Not long after, Xiang Yin shouted, "Prepare to meet the enemy." The others in the group raised their heads and saw a sea of blood rapidly moving in front of them, carefully searching every space in an attempt to find the location of the origin space. End of this chapter. Chapter 1799. Xiang Yin and the others didn't conceal their auras, so when they discovered the enemy also sensed their presence. This caused the Sacred Blood Mountain team to immediately rush over as if they had been injected with chicken blood. This was their usual thinking. In the past battles of the Black Abyss, whenever the Red Talisman Association cultivators encountered the Sacred Blood Mountain team under such circumstances, there was a high chance that they would flee. Even if they didn't flee, they would focus on restraining them. But what surprised the Sacred Blood Mountain team was that the enemies they encountered this time reacted rather strangely. They didn't flee, nor did they intend to scatter in all directions to restrain them. Instead, they charged straight at them. The distance between them rapidly closed, and both sides seemed to want to take down the other in one go. Although the leading Sacred Blood Mountain cultivator found it strange, it was already too late to change their formation at this point. The moment the two teams collided, the vast sea of blood suddenly became restless. Within the sea of blood, the expressions of the Sacred Blood Mountain cultivators changed drastically. The leader even turned around and stared in a certain direction as he roared, "Zhao Bingli, how dare you betray us?" The sea of blood's turbulence wasn't caused by the enemy, but by their own side. This was something that the Sacred Blood Mountain cultivators could clearly feel. This secret technique where multiple cultivators used blood arts together and then fused together to form a sea of blood was the most common method used by the blood race against their enemies. This was because after the sea of blood fused together, it would become larger and more powerful. It could even be said that even Constellation Realm cultivators would be able to display their usefulness in such a situation and provide some assistance to the stronger cultivators on their side. However, there was still a problem that needed to be resolved when using blood arts like this, and that was the suppression of their holiness. If everyone didn't possess holiness, then it would naturally be easy as no one would be able to suppress the other. If only one of the blood race members in the team possessed holiness, then it would be simple. That person would be able to preside over the sea of blood, and the other blood race members would assist him. But for the sacred blood mountain cultivators, everyone possessed holiness, so only the one with the strongest holiness could preside over the sea of blood, while the other cultivators restrained their holiness and assisted him. The sacred restraining technique was a secret technique of the blood race that was specially used in such situations. By activating this technique, the blood race members could restrain their holiness and prevent the situation of everyone suppressing and interfering with each other. But at the moment when the Saint Blood Mountain team was about to clash with the enemy, Zhao Bingli, who was in the team, suddenly did not restrain his holiness. What made the other cultivators even more shocked and puzzled was that Zhao Bingli's holiness was actually stronger than all of them. This was simply unimaginable. The strength of a Saint Blood Mountain cultivator's holiness was basically related to how long they had been in this realm. The longer they had been in this realm, the stronger their holiness would be. This was because they could bathe in more blood rain and refine more of the resources produced by this realm. Although Zhao Bingli's time in this world was not the shortest, it was not the longest either. There were many people with stronger holiness than him. Therefore, no one knew why his holiness had suddenly skyrocketed to such an extent. The only thing he was certain of was that Zhao Bingli's actions were undoubtedly a betrayal of Saint Blood Peak. When the balance of the Blood Sea was broken, the Red Talisman Association's team charged over under the lead of Xiang Yin and her sister. In the next instant, a holiness even stronger than Zhao Bingli's spread out. The already turbulent Blood Sea became even more fragile and collapsed with a loud bang. The cultivators of Saint Blood Peak that were hiding within the Sea of Blood revealed themselves in a sorry state, and all of them had unsightly expressions. Moreover, the thing that caused them to feel even more terrified was that the members of the Red Talisman Association had already arrived, and it just so happened that their magic energy was in a suppressed state. After an incense stick's worth of time, Hu Dequan's eyes suddenly widened. His face was filled with disbelief. He turned to look at Lu Yi, his lips trembling. Annihilated. Brother, Xiang Yin's team has annihilated a Saint Blood Mountain team. He had undoubtedly received a message from the other side. Got it. Lu Yi nodded. He had also received the message from Xiang Yin. Lu Yi was not surprised by this result. In the year since he entered this realm, he had been refining his own precious blood. But so far, he did not have a single drop left in his body. He had used all of it to subdue blood servants. In addition to Xiang Yin and Yu Yao who had been following him all this time, there were also several blood servants hidden in Saint Blood Mountain. Today's battle was the time to use these hidden blood servants. Each blood servant had refined a drop of his precious blood, and Xiang Yin and her sister had refined 1.5 drops. In terms of pure holiness, there were very few in Saint Blood Mountain who could compare to them. Hiding in the dark, the blood servants suddenly turned against him at a critical moment. Coupled with the suppression of their bloodline, it was not surprising that they could achieve such a result. Hu Dequan was extremely excited because the Red Talisman Association had never fought such a satisfying battle in the Battle of Blackwater in the past. Even if they were able to occupy an advantage in small-scale battles, it was absolutely impossible for them to annihilate all their enemies. Such a good start was enough to raise everyone's spirits. He secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, he had reached a consensus with Lu Yi before the battle and chose to believe in him. Otherwise, how could such a good thing happen? Without Lu Ye's help, the Red Talisman Association would likely continue on its old path. After pondering for a moment, Hu Dequan said, "Brother, I'll leave this battle to you. We'll fight however you want." At this moment, he no longer doubted Lu Ye's determination to fight against Saint Blood Mountain and decided to hand over his command to Lu Yi. After all, having two voices in one team wasn't good. After saying that, he stood up and stretched his body, looking like he was about to go all out. He flashed out of his hiding place and said, "I'm going to kill the enemy too." Atop the meteorite, Lu Yi watched him leave without stopping him, continuing to sense the positions of the blood servants and sending out a series of messages. The blood warriors in the two camps moved closer to each other. In another direction, another team from St. Blood Mountain encountered the same misfortune as the previous team, but this time, the ones leading the attack were not Xiang Yin and her sister, but Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran. Although Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran's holiness was slightly worse than Xiang Yin and her sisters, under the premise that they were unprepared for this battle, it wasn't difficult for them to win. Time passed by, and under Lu Ye's overall command, the scattered teams from St. Blood Mountain suffered one disaster after another. Once this happened, none of them could escape the fate of being wiped out. Such news spread among the Red Talisman Association cultivators, causing many of them who were accustomed to hard times to feel both incredulous and excited. In the past, they had always been the passive party, never having expected that one day they would be able to take the initiative to attack, and every time, they would easily achieve great results. The gap in numbers between the two sides was constantly shrinking, and the contrast in overall strength was no longer so great. For a moment, all the cultivators on their side couldn't help feeling that they had the upper hand. Only Lu Yi, who was responsible for overseeing the rear, felt a trace of unease in his heart because although the battle was progressing smoothly, in reality, the enemy's strongest master had yet to appear. Blazing Heaven must have already arrived in this space. Lu Yi could feel his radiant aura from afar, but what puzzled him was that Blazing Heaven had not moved from his original position since he arrived. No matter how many of his subordinates were injured, Blazing Heaven remained indifferent to them. According to the information provided by the blood servants hidden in St. Blood Mountain, Blazing Heaven didn't even give any direct instructions to the cultivators under his command. He was like a spectator watching this farce from afar. No matter who won or lost, it didn't affect him in the slightest. There must be a reason for this abnormality. If they wanted to win this battle, Blazing Heaven was the key. Only by killing him could they be considered a true victory. If Blazing Heaven didn't die, even if all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain died, they still wouldn't be able to win. While he was deep in thought, a ferocious aura suddenly erupted from a certain direction. Lu Ye's expression turned cold as he turned his head to look in that direction. Even from an unknown distance, he could still see a red light blooming in that direction. In his bloodline perception, he could sense that two of his blood servants had disappeared without a trace in that direction. The power of the Red Talisman. According to the information he obtained from Hu Dequan, after so many years, several cultivators with red talismans couldn't hold on to the ideals in their hearts and betrayed the Red Talisman Association, turning to side with St. Blood Mountain. But after one battle after another, only one of these people was still alive. Originally, there were two, however, the other one was killed by Lu Yi at Snow Listening Peak. The Red Talisman was undoubtedly a great killing weapon for any side, so it wouldn't be used lightly. But now, the Red Talisman's might was being activated, so it was obvious that the cultivator with the Red Talisman had been forced into a desperate situation. The two blood warriors under his command had been killed by Yang Kai. Soon, news came from the battlefield. Not only were his two blood servants killed by the Red Talisman Association, but also 3 members of the Red Talisman Association, all of whom were in the Yuyao realm. Since the beginning of the battle, this was the first time they had suffered losses. They had lost 5 people in one go, which was a huge loss. However, the enemy didn't have it easy either. The enemy team had been completely wiped out, so it could be considered as revenge. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then sent a message out, "Brother, we can move out now. Be careful." In another direction, Yang Ling, who had been hibernating and conserving his strength, suddenly opened his eyes. He checked the sound talisman's message, but didn't respond. He stood up and rushed forward. That direction was where Blazing Heaven was. In the past, every time in the Battle of the Black Abyss, it was Yang Ling who restrained Blazing Heaven, because he was the only one with 2 red talismans on the Red Talisman Association's side, one for attack and one for defense. After many years of nourishment, any red talisman was no weaker than sunshine, so even if his cultivation was much lower, it was no problem for him to restrain blazing heaven. Yang Ling was already familiar with this. This time was no exception. Lu Yi was very concerned about blazing heaven and wanted to know what he was doing at the moment, but he couldn't investigate it himself, because once he met blazing heaven, it was very likely that he would be forced to reveal the strength of his divine attribute. Before he really fought with blazing heaven, Lu Yi didn't want to expose this point, so he could only trouble Yang Ling to make a trip. End of chapter. Chapter 1800. In the void, Yang Ling's figure moved with a solemn expression. As he approached blazing heaven's position, his body began to emit a faint red light, as if a layer of blood mist had enveloped him. The red light became brighter and brighter, and its power became more and more intense. Blazing heaven, who had been standing quietly in place, finally sensed something. He turned his head to look in Yang Ling's direction, and a disdainful sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Finally, Yang Ling stood 300 kilometers away from blazing heaven, his body glowing with red light. The power of the red talisman had been pushed to the extreme, and it could be activated at any time. The powerful aura caused Yang Ling's clothes to flutter and his hair to fly. He stared at blazing heaven with a solemn and focused expression. If blazing heaven made any inappropriate moves, the power of the red talisman would be activated immediately. Their eyes met, and blazing heaven raised his hand slightly, pointing it at Yang Ling, then crooked his finger and said in a mocking voice, "Do you dare?" Yang Ling didn't respond. Even though besides him, Hu Dequan and Meng Su both possessed a red talisman each, but these were the few red talismans left in their red talisman association. Every single one of them used would be one less, so he really didn't dare take the initiative to make a move. The power of the red talisman was terrifying, but he wasn't sure if it could kill a Rizhao. However, once he activated the red talisman, if blazing heaven didn't die, he would die without a doubt. He didn't dare to take the risk, so even if blazing heaven ridiculed and provoked him, he just ignored it and did his job well. Seeing Yang Ling not moving, blazing heaven snorted softly and ignored him. He spread out his divine sense, and could clearly sense that the cultivators under his command were dying, but he still didn't do anything, and only had an unfathomable expression on his face. In the end, Lu Yi still took action. The blood servants he had planted in St. Blood Mountain were exposed one after another, and the St. Blood Mountain team also realized that something was wrong, so they became more cautious. Of course, this wasn't the main reason he was forced to take action. The main reason was that there were a few cultivators on St. Blood Mountain's side, and their divine nature was so strong that even Xiang Yin and her sister couldn't compare. These cultivators were the ones who'd been in this world for the longest time. They'd bathed in blood rain for an entire few thousands of years and refined various resources, allowing them to accumulate a sufficiently impressive amount of dense saint aura within their bodies. With such a cultivator leading them, the Sacred Blood Mountain no longer had to endure the suppression of the Sacred Blood Mountain. As a result, the Red Talisman Association's team was unable to quickly exterminate their enemies like they had in the beginning. Once the war broke out, it would be incomparably intense. There were casualties on the enemy's side, but there were also casualties on their side. Fortunately, the strength of the Saint Blood Mountain had been constantly weakened. Otherwise, the current situation would be very disadvantageous for the Red Talisman Association. Somewhere on the battlefield, the battle was extremely intense. The figures of the Red Talisman Association's cultivators flashed as they continuously evaded the sea of blood. At the same time, they executed various techniques. The cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain were hidden in the sea of blood. With the sea of blood as their base, they had the absolute upper hand. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were in a sorry state, and they didn't dare get too close to the sea of blood at all. Because the Saint Blood Mountain's cultivator that controlled the sea of blood was stronger than them in terms of saint aura. Once they were swallowed by the sea of blood, then they would definitely perish. Suddenly, a flowing light flashed over swiftly from a certain direction. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were shocked when they sensed this familiar aura. The Exalt Master has arrived. They'd been stalling for time all along because they were waiting for this moment. They'd personally experienced how terrifying Lu Ye's Saint Aura was, so they naturally knew what would happen next. They immediately sent out their divine perception to the cultivators on their side and told them to prepare to counterattack. After that, they saw Lu Yi didn't stop and charge headfirst into the sea of blood. In the next instant, exclaims of shock resounded. Even if they were very far away, their bodies still went weak when the terrifying Saint Aura erupted. The entire sea of blood rumbled as it collapsed, revealing the figures of almost 10 cultivators that were hidden within it. All of them were at a loss for what to do and had terrified expressions. When they saw this, how could the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association who'd received the instructions via voice transmission from Xiang Yin, and Xiang Yin wouldn't hesitate, and they seized this opportunity to pounce forward. Lu Ye's dense Saint Aura continued to surge as he held his saber horizontally in front of him. Saber light flickered as he unleashed a massacre. After the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association pounced over, the originally anxious battle immediately turned into a one-sided slaughter. After a short while, the battlefield quieted down. Lu Yi turned his head to look at Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin, who were standing in the distance. He discovered that although they were injured, they weren't seriously injured. They were just in a sorry state. Without stopping, Lu Ye's figure flashed and pounced in another direction. In that direction, a similarly anxious battle was erupting, and it was abnormally fierce. As time passed, the teams of St. Blood Mountain were eliminated one after another. The overall strength of both sides went from being crushed to gradually reaching a balance, and then the tables turned. In just a short 2 days, almost all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain had been slaughtered. On a meteorite, Hu Dequan, who was covered in blood, returned and landed beside Lu Yi. Although he looked a little tired, his spirit was extremely high. "Brother, you've really made a good plan." There had never been a battle in the Black Abyss where the Red Talisman Association had such a satisfying victory. Although they had suffered some losses, and the losses weren't small, after this battle, the wings of blazing heaven on St. Blood Mountain's side were almost completely cut off. In just 2 short days, Hu Dequan had witnessed Lu Ye's terrifying ability to dispatch and kill the enemy. Any order he gave would cause a team of St. Blood Mountain to suffer. If it weren't for Lu Yi, this battle wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Lu Yi turned his head and glanced at him. "Blazing Heaven is still alive." Hu Dequan nodded solemnly. "So we still have to deal with him. Only by dealing with him could this battle be considered a true victory, and in the future, St. Blood Mountain would no longer exist in this region." While speaking, Hu Dequan frowned again. "But brother, I feel that something is not quite right." Lu Ye's eyes flashed. "What's wrong?" "Blazing Heaven hasn't made any moves. I went to take a look from afar." Although Yang Ling used the power of the Red Talisman to restrain him, logically speaking, with St. Blood Mountain's heavy losses, Blazing Heaven shouldn't have done nothing. But since he entered here, he hasn't moved. "I'm afraid he's up to something." Lu Yi nodded. "He's definitely up to something. Right now, no one knows what he's planning, but there's one thing: his subordinates are almost all dead. No matter what he's planning, he has no one he can use. Ri Zhao is terrifying, but he's alone. We still have more than 30 people, so if we work together, we should be able to take him down." Hu Dequan thought about it seriously for a moment, then agreed, "You're right." At this moment, Lu Ye's sound talisman trembled slightly. He checked it and said, "The last team of St. Blood Mountain has been destroyed. It's time to deal with Blazing Heaven." Hu Dequan's expression turned solemn. "Let's go. I've nurtured that red talisman for many years. It's time for it to see the light of day." The two of them flew forward together. Lu Ye's gaze was deep as he looked forward, the uneasiness in his heart growing stronger. He had no way of guessing what Blazing Heaven was planning. Although he had secretly subdued some St. Blood Mountain cultivators and inadvertently discovered another secret, he knew nothing about Blazing Heaven. In this battle, even if Blazing Heaven was tied down by Yang Ling and couldn't personally take action, why didn't the St. Blood Mountain teams gather together after sensing that the situation was not right? Why did they continue to wander around in small groups? Logically speaking, if they gathered together, their ability to protect themselves would be much greater. However, they didn't do so. Their scattering undoubtedly gave the other side an opportunity to take them down one by one. In addition, Lu Yi didn't believe that Blazing Heaven didn't take action purely because he was tied down by Yang Ling. If he were in Blazing Heaven's position, with so many of his subordinates dead, he would have to give it his all. As long as he could withstand Yang Ling's red talisman, then he could take the lives of anyone on this battlefield. As Lu Yi and Hu Dequan flew towards Blazing Heaven's position, the other cultivators on their side also received orders to gather together. The faces of all the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were filled with excitement because they'd never experienced such a satisfying battle. In the past, every single time they went against the Saint Blood Mountain, they'd always been at an absolute disadvantage, and they'd always been forced to hide. However, this time, so many cultivators of Saint Blood Mountain had been killed by them. They hadn't even used many of the formations they had set up before, and the location of the origin source had never been exposed. Now, Blazing Heaven was the only one left in Saint Blood Mountain. Although there was no sunlight on their side, they had several red talismans and many cultivators who were still alive. Even if they used their lives, they could take down Blazing Heaven. They would definitely win this battle. In the void, Blazing Heaven was still standing there quietly. 300 kilometers away, Yang Ling was secretly activating the might of the red talisman as a deterrent. Even though he already knew that almost all the cultivators of Saint Blood Mountain had been killed, he didn't dare to relax in the slightest. His eyes were fixed on Blazing Heaven. If Blazing Heaven made any inappropriate movements, the red talisman's might would be activated immediately. Suddenly, Blazing Heaven looked at Yang Ling with a puzzled expression. "How did you do it?" Yang Ling became even more vigilant. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "What?" Blazing Heaven said slowly, "On the surface, my Saint Blood Mountain is several times stronger than your Red Talisman Association. How did you kill all the cultivators under my command? Also, what methods did you use to instigate those traitors?" He stood there and spread out his divine sense. Although he could sense the withering of life, he couldn't investigate the specific situation of the battle, so he was really curious. He could sense that there were cultivators under his command who had betrayed him, and there was more than one of them. However, those traitors shouldn't have affected the overall trend of the battle. "Do you think I'll answer you?" Yang Ling replied coldly. Blazing Heaven sighed. "Forget it. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. It doesn't matter." His dispirited appearance made Yang Ling frown. He instinctively felt that something was wrong, but he didn't dare to think too deeply about it, lest he become absent-minded. End of chapter. Chapter 1801. All of a sudden, Yang Ling detected a familiar aura quickly approaching him, and he became spirited. A moment later, two figures stood not far from him. They were Lu Yi and Hu Dequan, who had rushed over at the first moment. Soon, another team, led by Meng Su, arrived and assembled. After a while, the scattered Red Talisman Association cultivators gathered. Compared to before the battle, there were a dozen fewer people, and most of them were Red Talisman Association cultivators. Lu Ye's blood servants had also lost a few. Moreover, after 2 days of battle, almost everyone was not in peak condition. Some of them had not even recovered from their injuries. Even so, there were still nearly 30 people left. Looking at Blazing Heaven, Hu Dequan's face was filled with resentment. He couldn't help but think back to all the years he had spent fighting against the Saint Blood Peak. He roared, "Blazing Heaven, your time of death has come." He thought that Blazing Heaven would still be stubborn despite the situation. After all, he was facing Rizhou. Unexpectedly, he nodded and said, "Yes, you are really impressive." As he spoke, his gaze swept across the front, pausing slightly on Lu Yi. He revealed a puzzled expression because he had never seen Lu Yi before. However, he didn't seem to care too much and quickly moved away. Blazing Heaven's calmness made Hu Dequan frown. Recalling what Lu Yi had said to him, he couldn't help but shout, "What are you planning?" Blazing Heaven laughed. "My subordinates have all been killed by you, and I'm restrained here by your red talisman. What can I do?" I'm just standing here waiting for death. Hu Dequan said angrily, if you really want to die, why don't you commit suicide? Otherwise, you'll die a horrible death. Blazing Heaven raised his eyebrows. Why not? Hu Dequan opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Of course, he wasn't naive enough to believe that Rizhao would commit suicide. Meng Su said coldly, there's no need to talk nonsense with him. Just kill him. As long as he's dead, no matter what scheme he has, it'll be useless. As he spoke, he raised his hand and a dazzling red light bloomed at his fingertips. Hearing this, Hu Dequan nodded, do it. He also activated the power of his red talisman. Lu Ye's eyes flashed and he also activated the power of the red talisman. All of a sudden, four streaks of red light blossomed in unison, and a terrifying might swept through the surroundings. Even though all of the cultivators present were Yu Yao, they couldn't help but feel their bodies and minds sway uncontrollably. All they could do was channel their power to protect themselves. After a short while, the power of their respective red talismans was pushed to the limit. To everyone's surprise, Blazing Heaven continued to stand there quietly, as if he didn't move at all. Instead, he looked at everyone with a pitiful expression. Kill! Hu Dequan roared as he activated the power of his red talisman. The red light condensed and transformed into a sharp blade that slashed towards Blazing Heaven. At the same time, Yang Ling attacked as well. His red talisman transformed into a ferocious and terrifying primordial ferocious beast. It was lifelike, and it roared as it charged towards Blazing Heaven like a bolt of lightning. The horn on its forehead flickered with red light as if it could destroy everything in the world. Meng Su's red talisman was slightly different from the other two. It was purely a huge palm print, and with every inch it pressed down, even the space around it was shattered. Hu Dequan and Yang Ling, who were the first to attack, suddenly turned their heads and looked at Meng Su in astonishment. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. At the same time, the expressions of the cultivators standing beside Lu Yi changed drastically. They suddenly felt as if a great disaster was about to befall them. An incomparably strong aura of death lingered around them, causing their bodies to stiffen. They instinctively wanted to dodge, but the space around them had frozen. Lu Yi sighed. When the red light spread out, a layer of red light enveloped his body, turning into a solid defense. The huge palm print pressed down. The 7 or 8 cultivators of the Red Talisman Association beside Lu Yi could only barely resist for a moment before their bodies exploded and died with despair. Even Lu Ye's bones creaked from the pressure of the palm print. The red light on his body dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although he had activated the defensive Red Talisman with the help of his precious blood, Meng Su's Red Talisman had been nourished for too long. Its power was incomparably terrifying. It seemed that the defensive Red Talisman alone was somewhat difficult to resist. Meng Su's expression was also astonished because he didn't expect that the Red Talisman that Lu Yi had activated was actually used for defense. Logically speaking, everyone should have activated the offensive Red Talisman at this time. After all, they had to join forces to kill Blazing Heaven. However, before the Red Talisman's power was fully activated, he didn't know what type of Red Talisman Lu Yi had activated. He only had his own preconceived judgment. He was just a little puzzled. Why would Lu Yi activate the defensive Red Talisman at this time? What was he guarding against? What are you doing? Yang Ling roared. Although he had already made a judgment, he still couldn't believe it. That was his brother who had been with him for 2,000 years. He didn't understand why Lu Yi would do this, nor did he know when Lu Yi had changed sides. Before this, neither he nor Hu Dequan had noticed at all. As Yang Ling's words fell, Lu Yi, who was wrapped in a dim red light, finally moved. He activated the vertical sweep technique. Everyone only felt their vision blur, followed by the flash of a blade. When they came back to their senses, Lu Yi was already standing not far from Meng Su. The smear of blood on his pitch-black long blade was extremely eye-catching. It could be said that Meng Su had been caught off guard. From his point of view, when he activated the Red Talisman, Lu Yi and many of the cultivators around him would have been reduced to dust. No Yu Yao could survive the power of such a Red Talisman. However, Lu Yi had activated the defensive red talisman and blocked this terrifying blow, saving his life. Meng Su staggered back, his hand clutching his chest. He could clearly feel that his internal organs had been completely pulverized. Lu Ye's blade was incomparably fast and ferocious. It had directly cut off his chances of survival. However, with the powerful vitality of a late-stage Yu Yao, he wouldn't die so quickly. Feeling the arrival of death like this was undoubtedly an extremely torturous and terrifying thing. He looked at Lu Yi in disbelief. How did you find out? When he should have activated the offensive red talisman, Lu Yi had activated the defensive red talisman. This was clearly a precaution, so Meng Su understood that Lu Yi must have sensed something. Lu Yi turned a deaf ear to his question, nor did he have any intention of explaining. He only looked regretfully at the place where the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had been standing beside him just now. There was only a pile of dismembered corpses left. When he had secretly subdued Zhou Tianbao, Lu Yi had already learned of a secret. Blazing Heaven had planted a spy in the Red Talisman Association. However, Zhou Tianbao didn't know who this person was. Lu Yi had been secretly investigating the Red Talisman Association during his time in contact with them, but to no avail. He hadn't been able to find any clues about the various conflicts with the Saint Blood Mountain. He only knew that this spy was extremely well hidden, and there was a high probability that this spy was one of the leaders of the Red Talisman Association. This was because an ordinary cultivator wouldn't be able to overthrow the Red Talisman Association. Yang Ling, Hu Dequan, and Meng Su were all under his suspicion. However, he couldn't say this out loud. If he did, it would only make them suspect his motives. Compared to a cultivator tainted by the divine attribute, the Red Talisman Association would undoubtedly trust their own cultivator more. It was only when Meng Su impatiently activated the Red Talisman that Lu Yi vaguely came to a conclusion. However, there was one thing that Lu Yi couldn't understand. Meng Su definitely hadn't been tainted by the divine attribute, because when he activated the divine attribute, he hadn't been suppressed at all. Since that was the case, why would he cooperate with Blazing Heaven and submit to him? Moreover, this should have happened in the last 10 years, otherwise the Red Talisman Association would have been long gone. Why? Hu Dequan's gaze trembled as he looked at Meng Su. His face was extremely pale. Meng Su's sudden betrayal left him at a loss of who he could trust in this world. Meng Su's vitality was extremely dim. He looked at Hu Dequan for a long time before saying, "We can't win. I just want to live." Hu Dequan's gaze became unfocused, and then he flew into a rage. Blazing Heaven is going to die soon. After so many years of conflict, there will be an end to it. Who told you that we can't win? Meng Su opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but his vitality was completely extinguished at this moment. Hu Dequan's face was filled with grief, and Yang Ling wasn't any better. The remaining Red Talisman Association cultivators were all paranoid. No one knew if there was a hidden traitor among them. Blazing Heaven isn't dead. Lu Ye's calm voice rang out. Only then did Hu Dequan and Yang Ling come back to their senses. They turned to look at Blazing Heaven. The power of the red talismans had dissipated, but what they saw made their eyes shrink. Blazing Heaven was indeed not dead, although he looked a little battered. After all, he had blocked the power of 2 red talismans by himself. It was inevitable that he would be injured. Even his aura was somewhat weak. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and suddenly laughed loudly. His laughter was filled with mockery. "You still want to win? Meng Su is right. You can't win. He joined me because he saw the truth, but you are all deceived by the falsehood." He stopped laughing and his voice became stern. "No one can win." "Blood Sea!" Lu Yi shouted, and took the initiative to activate the Blood Sea technique. Xiang Yin and the others came back to their senses, and they all dove into the Blood Sea. As their blood chi was activated, the Blood Sea, which was already quite large, suddenly expanded in all directions, enveloping the group of Red Talisman Association cultivators. "Focus, kill Blazing Heaven first." Lu Ye's voice rang in the ears of the Red Talisman Association cultivators. Hu Dequan then shouted, "Kill Blazing Heaven." The Blood Sea surged, and in an instant, it covered a radius of 1,000 miles and quickly spread towards Blazing Heaven's position. Strangely, Blazing Heaven didn't have any intention of dodging the Blood Sea's attack. Instead, he had a crazed look on his face. He opened his arms and made a hugging gesture and shouted wildly, "Good, good!" In the next instant, his entire body was enveloped by the Blood Sea. Chapter 1802. The Sea of Blood surged and his magic power fluctuated. Lu Yi had pushed his saint nature to the limit. With him in the lead, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, as well as a group of blood servants, madly besieged Blazing Heaven in the Sea of Blood. Although they had suffered heavy losses in this battle, there were still more than 20 people alive, and all of them were Yu Yao. If Blazing Heaven was at his peak, these cultivators alone might not be able to do anything to him. After all, he was Rizhao. It was like more than 20 star mansions fighting against one Yu Yao. If they didn't form an array, they would be easily defeated one by one. Moreover, Blazing Heaven's cultivation was higher, so he could fight whenever he wanted and escape whenever he wanted. He had an absolute advantage. However, under the suppression of Lu Ye's saint nature, Blazing Heaven's strength was greatly reduced. With the Sea of Blood sealing the area, he was doomed to die. However, the strange thing was that even in such a desperate situation, Blazing Heaven didn't panic at all. Instead, he laughed wildly. Facing the attacks from all directions, he didn't show any intention of defending. Instead, he met attacks with attacks. He didn't seem to care about his own life at all. The uneasiness in Lu Ye's heart had reached its peak. He was certain that Blazing Heaven still had something up his sleeve. Otherwise, how could the dignified Rizhao act like he wanted to die? Moreover, the words he said before were also thought-provoking. However, at this point in the battle, there was no turning back. No matter what Blazing Heaven's trump card was, he had to be killed first. The result of not defending was that Blazing Heaven's body continued to be injured. His flesh began to disintegrate, revealing his white bones. Casualties also appeared on his side. Under the suppression of Lu Ye's saint nature, Blazing Heaven's strength was far from his peak. However, the biggest difference between Rizhao and Yu Yao wasn't the increase in their physique or magic power, but their soul. In comparison, Rizhao's soul strength had reached a whole new level. Lu Yi could suppress his physical strength, but he couldn't suppress his soul strength. This led to the cultivators on his side being caught by Li Shang. Even if they didn't die, they would be injured. His terrifying soul power fluctuated wildly, constantly playing the sad song of death. Seeing the situation like this, Lu Yi didn't dare to delay any longer. He made a prompt decision and quickly retreated, far away from the area where the fierce battle was taking place. At the same time, he activated his magic power and a red light bloomed. Before he set off, the humanoid tribe had given him 3 red talismans. One was for attack, one was for defense, and the last one was for escape. It could be said to be extremely thorough. He had already used the defensive red talisman earlier, and now he was activating the offensive red talisman. Nightclubs were full of dreams. He wanted to use the red talisman to settle everything in one battle. Red light flashed, and even the luster of the Blood Sea could not hide this dazzling color. Lu Ye's aura rose crazily, and his clothes trembled. The red light seemed to have a life of its own as it flowed towards the Pan Mountain saber in his hand. In the blink of an eye, the originally pitch-black Pan Mountain saber turned into a blood-red saber. Lu Yi held the saber in his hand, a powerful belief that everything in this world could be severed with a single slash of the saber appeared in his heart. Under the support of the red talisman, the Pan Mountain saber trembled. Lu Yi raised his other hand and gripped the saber's hilt with both hands. His spiritual sense surged in all directions as his body shot forward. After receiving his voice transmission, the cultivators who had been attacking Blazing Heaven quickly retreated in all directions. At this moment, Blazing Heaven, whose body was riddled with wounds, raised his head and looked towards Lu Yi. Even though he was separated by the Sea of Blood, he could still feel the ferocious power of the saber. He was still not afraid. The Blood Sea's powerful restrictive force was obviously afraid that he would escape, and so it wanted to bind him to the spot. However, he had no intention of escaping. Instead, he crazily surged his spiritual sense and attacked Lu Yi. In an instant, Lu Ye's spiritual sense was in turmoil. Fortunately, he had the Rainbow God Lotus to protect his spiritual sense. Therefore, he was able to withstand the attack of Blazing Heaven's spiritual sense. His body was wrapped in the red light. In the blink of an eye, he had covered a distance of 100 miles. The blood-red saber slashed down fiercely. Lu Yi wanted to activate his saber's power. However, under the support of the red talisman, the saber's power was too ferocious. He could not activate any saber's power. It was a simple and unadorned saber slash. After a slight tremor, the enormous sea of blood was instantly split apart like a piece of bloody tofu. The blood-red saber chi stretched for thousands of kilometers as if it wanted to cut open this space. Everywhere it passed, the meteorites and floating continents were reduced to dust. Muffled groans sounded. The blood servants had been hit by the saber chi, and all of them had turned pale. Although Lu Yi was the master of the blood sea, the blood servants had always been supporting him. When the saber slashed open the blood sea, they also suffered a backlash. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association did not suffer any backlash, but under the powerful shockwaves, they were unable to stabilize themselves. It was not until several breaths later that the dazzling red light gradually disappeared. Everyone immediately looked towards Blazing Heaven. They wanted to know the result of this saber slash. What they saw excited them. This was because where Blazing Heaven had been, there was no longer a body of flesh and blood. There was only a skeleton left. Blazing Heaven was dead. Lu Yi stood not far from the skeleton. The mountain saber in his hand was still in a slashing posture. His brows were tightly furrowed. The situation was not right. The saber slash just now was so powerful that it was impossible for Blazing Heaven, who was suppressed by the divine attribute and heavily injured, to survive. This was something Lu Yi had expected. But why were his skeletal remains preserved? Logically speaking, even if this saber slash could not reduce Blazing Heaven to dust, it should have at least cut him in half. But his skeleton was unreasonably hard. Under such a slash, there was no trace of damage. Lu Yi looked over and could not help but narrow his eyes. He discovered that on the eerie white bones, there were actually many crisscrossing and extremely complicated veined patterns spread out. The key was that these veined patterns gave him an incomparably familiar feeling. These were the patterns of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. They covered every corner of Blazing Heaven's skeleton. Looking at these patterns, Lu Yi could not help but recall a piece of information he had heard from Zhou Tianbao. Blazing Heaven had been cultivating a secret technique and had only achieved some small success a few months ago. When he heard this news, Lu Yi immediately thought of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. This thing had appeared with the appearance of the blood moon. If he could observe it, so could others. If there was a secret technique in this world that could interest a person like Blazing Heaven, it would undoubtedly be the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo that had appeared with the blood moon. When he was fighting with Blazing Heaven, Lu Yi had been wary of this because he had personally tried to activate the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo and knew how strange it was. But in fact, Blazing Heaven had not shown any signs of activating the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. Lu Yi had not expected that Blazing Heaven would actually brand this Blood Eye Spirit tattoo onto his skeleton. To be able to accomplish this, Blazing Heaven's attainments in the Spirit Tattoo Dao were absolutely terrifying. This kind of difficulty was not something Yang Kai could compare with when he branded the same spirit tattoo onto his talent tree. The great advantage of branding a spirit tattoo onto a leaf of a talent tree was that even if something went wrong, it could still be modified. With such convenience, as long as Lu Yi knew the specific structure of a spirit tattoo, he could easily brand it onto a leaf of his talent tree and use it for his own use. Any other method of constructing spiritual tattoos would not work. It had to be done in one go. One could imagine how difficult it was to imprint such a complicated spiritual tattoo on one's bones offline. But he had actually done it. But what was strange was that Blazing Heaven had not activated the power of this spirit tattoo from beginning to end. Moreover, neither the Red Talisman Association nor his blood warriors had mentioned that Blazing Heaven was proficient in the spirit tattoo Dao. Lu Yi suddenly had a lot of doubts in his heart and couldn't figure out what Blazing Heaven's purpose was. But no matter what, Blazing Heaven was dead in the end. This battle, they had won. Looking around, there were less than 20 cultivators left in the messy battlefield. Just now, when they were fighting with Blazing Heaven, he had killed a few more. One had to know that there were originally more than 40 cultivators on their side, and the Saint Blood Peak had more than 100 cultivators on their side. But in just a few days of fighting, a large number of Yu Yao and Ri Ri had died. Those who were still alive all felt that it was unreal. However, when Lu Yi saw the joy in Hu Dequan and the others' eyes, this joy quickly turned into surprise as they stared behind him. Lu Yi suddenly turned around and looked at Blazing Heaven's skeleton. At this moment, the white skeleton was blooming with a faint red light. This red light started from the ribs and quickly spread to the rest of his body. In an instant, the spirit tattoo branded on the skeleton was activated. This incomparably strange scene made Lu Yi completely unable to understand. Logically speaking, Blazing Heaven was already dead. No matter what he had branded on his skeleton before he died, it should not have been activated. But such a thing was happening right under his nose. Without any hesitation, the mountain saber returned to its sheath. Lu Yi grasped the saber hilt with one hand and assumed the posture of drawing the saber. His eyes became focused and his magic power began to hum. The moment the saber was unsheathed, the flesh on Lu Ye's right arm began to split open. Not only that, but his entire body also bore a tremendous burden. Saber drawing slash. A shocking saber light flashed. This was the strongest attack Lu Yi could use without using any external strength. With his middle Yu Yao cultivation, even if Blazing Heaven was still alive, such a close saber strike would not end well. But even so, this saber strike was unable to damage the skeleton in the slightest. Lu Yi could clearly feel that his saber strike was blocked by the strange red light. As the saber slashed out, the skeleton was instantly sent flying. In the surrounding space, an inexplicable strength seemed to be attracted by the skeleton, gathering towards it. Lu Yi focused his senses and quickly realized that this was the enormous blood and qi that had escaped from Blazing Heaven's body after his death. As Ri, Blazing Heaven's blood and qi was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. At this moment, the blood and qi that had already escaped was clearly attracted by some kind of power. It enveloped the skeleton and turned into a not-so-dense blood ball. End of chapter. Chapter 1803. What's going on? Hu Dequan flew over and asked. I'm not sure. Lu Yi shook his head, but it's definitely not a good thing. Blazing Heaven's actions before his death were too strange. Now that he thought about it, Blazing Heaven seemed to have taken the initiative to seek death. Not only that, but he also didn't care about the lives of the cultivators under his command. Otherwise, with Sacred Blood Peak's background, their side wouldn't have won so easily. Combined with the current situation, Lu Yi couldn't help but make a bold guess. Blazing Heaven really did have a backup plan, but this backup plan would only be effective after his death. This was very strange. If a person was already dead, what was the point of having a backup plan? Without any time to think about it, Lu Yi shouted, "Attack together!" No matter what Blazing Heaven's backup plan was, they couldn't allow him to do as he wished. So, as long as they could break the blood sphere that wrapped the skeleton and find a way to destroy it, no matter what Blazing Heaven's plan was, it would be useless. Having just won a victory, the many cultivators didn't even have time to catch their breath before attacking together, bombarding the blood sphere with attacks. However, what made them helpless was that no matter how fierce their attacks were, they couldn't shake the blood sphere in the slightest, only causing it to tremble in the void. All of a sudden, Lu Yi stopped and spread out his divine sense. He vaguely sensed that something was approaching from all directions. Soon he realized what it was. It was a blood vitality that was dissipating into the surrounding space, and the source of this blood vitality was the remains of the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators after they died. In the previous battle, after the Blood Warriors killed the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators, They didn't dare to casually refine their blood vitality because the blood vitality of the sacred blood peak cultivators also contained a saint attribute. Rashly refining this blood vitality would be risky for the blood warriors. This was different from when they bathed in the blood rain and refined the weak saint attribute contained in it. If the blood warriors didn't refine this blood vitality, it would naturally remain in the area where the cultivators died. Lu Yi never expected that this residual blood vitality would actually gather here at this moment, and the source of this gathering was undoubtedly the strange blood sphere. It seemed to have the ability to draw in the saint attribute blood vitality. Just blazing heaven's blood vitality wrapped around the skeleton was enough to create such a situation. If this blood vitality were to be drawn in, who knew what would happen? Lu Yi hurriedly shouted, "Stop the blood and qi." The cultivators who were attacking the blood balls were startled when they heard this. They quickly investigated and found the problem. They immediately tried to stop it. Lu Yi even spread out his blood sea, transforming it into a river of blood, and together with the other blood warriors, sealed off a large area. However, despite their efforts, they were unable to completely block off the blood essence that was being attracted from all directions. Streams of blood essence continued to enter the blood ball, causing the color of the blood ball to become denser. Not only that, but the surface of the blood ball was also covered in complicated patterns. A strange aura emanated from the blood ball. Lu Yi stole a glance at the blood ball and was extremely anxious, but there was nothing he could do. In just a few dozen breaths of time, the blood sphere began to shine with a brilliant red light. Moreover, its surface was covered with lines that illuminated the surrounding area. At this moment, the blood sphere was no different from the blood moon that Lu Yi had observed from the outside. Moreover, the lines within the blood sphere were intertwined with one another, making the blood sphere look like a wide-open eye. The blood and qi no longer converged towards the blood sphere. Those that could be intercepted had been intercepted, and those that could not be intercepted had been absorbed by the blood sphere. It was also at this moment that the void trembled and hummed. It was as if a powerful force had descended from an unknown place and landed on the blood sphere. The blood sphere's dazzling light instantly shone brightly. All the cultivators who were staring at the blood sphere were in a daze at this moment, their spirit seas becoming restless. Lu Yi was also affected, but it was much milder than the others. He stared at the blood sphere that was violently changing and absorbing power from an unknown place. At this moment, many of his doubts were suddenly answered. Blazing Heaven was not proficient in the Tao of Spirit runes, so ever since he entered this world, the Red Talisman Association had only mentioned this matter to the blood warriors. Otherwise, it was impossible for no one to not tell him such important information. Blazing Heaven was able to inscribe the complete Blood Eye Spirit rune on his bones not because of his own ability, but because a certain will was secretly assisting him. Only then could he accomplish this almost impossible task. He didn't care about his own life or death. It wasn't that he didn't want to live or wasn't afraid of death, but that he had been influenced by a certain will. His death, and even the deaths of the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain, were all in preparation for this moment. That will was about to descend into the source space. That will was the will of the blood ancestors' treasure blood. Only it could make someone like Sunshine be willing to die for it. When he met with Fong Lao before, Fong Lao had said that the blood ancestors' treasure blood could not enter this place. So, if it wanted to invade the source space, it could only rely on the continuous deaths of the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain. After these cultivators died, the remnant holiness would slowly infect the source space of Minuscule Mountain. This was the scene that Lu Yi had seen at the beginning. However, with his help, the situation of the source space had become much better. This space had been sealed by the source space, so it wasn't easy for the blood ancestors' treasure blood to descend. Otherwise, it would have succeeded long ago. According to its previous method, perhaps after many more years, the source space would be completely corroded by the holiness sooner or later. Once that happened, the source space would no longer have the power to seal it. The source space would be contaminated, and the core world would be controlled by the blood ancestors' will. However, that would take too long, and the blood ancestors' will was clearly impatient. Looking at it this way, The information that Lu Yi had first heard from Xiang Yin was correct. Xiang Yin had said that if there was a day when the Red Talisman Association and Saint Blood Mountain had a victor, the seal of this world would be broken. This was something that should happen, because fundamentally speaking, the struggle between the Red Talisman Association and Saint Blood Mountain was a struggle between the source space and the Blood Ancestors' will. No matter who won in the end, there would be no need for the seal of this world. At this moment, the Blood Ancestors' will was using Sunshine Skeleton as a basis and the blood and chi of many first-generation blood race cultivators as a foundation to construct the Blood Eye Spirit Tattoo in the source space. This spirit tattoo alone wouldn't be very useful, but it could resonate with the Blood Ancestors' will outside and guide it. As a result, there was a flaw in the seal of the source space. The Blood Ancestors' will could use Blazing Heaven Skeleton as a basis to descend here. Perhaps it wasn't just the will that descended, but also the drop of Blood Ancestors' will. Many thoughts flashed through Lu Ye's mind, and he immediately understood one thing. This time, they were in big trouble. He had thought that killing Blazing Heaven would be the end of the war, but who would have thought that it was just the beginning of a nightmare? Looking around, whether it was his subordinates or the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, all of them had pale faces and were trembling. They had obviously been affected by the Blood Eye Spirit Tattoo, and the great terror brought about by the descent of the Blood Ancestors' will made it impossible for them to resist. This was especially true for the Blood Ancestors, who had all turned into soft-footed shrimps. This was the natural suppression of their bloodlines. Although Lu Yi wasn't that weak, under the influence of the Blood Eye Spirit Tattoo, his spirit sea was churning. If it weren't for the protection of the seven-colored divine lotus, his situation wouldn't have been any better than the others. Under such circumstances, he couldn't do anything to stop it. Bitterness filled his heart. Blazing Heaven was right, no one could win this battle. The people of St. Blood Peak had all died, and the Red Talisman Society and Blood Warriors hadn't survived either. Once the Blood Ancestors' precious blood descended here, it was likely this space would no longer have any vitality. Suddenly, the light of the blood ball became extremely dazzling. Then, in a situation where no one could see it, it twisted and transformed. The light dissipated, and the great terror that enveloped their bodies and minds also disappeared. The turbulent divine sea calmed down, and under this contrast, the cultivators all coughed up blood. Lu Yi was no exception. He raised his hand to wipe the corner of his mouth and focused his gaze in front of him. As far as he could see, the blood ball had disappeared. What replaced it was a slender and graceful figure. She was completely naked, and her curves were smooth. Strangely, there was no temptation at all. Instead, it was filled with an exaggerated sense of explosiveness. It was a tall woman with long, blood-red hair that covered her back. Her skin was fair, and her eyes were blood-red. However, there were lines in her pupils, as if two miniature blood moons were embedded in them. Lu Ye's heart thumped wildly. Even though he already knew that the Blood Ancestors' precious blood had given birth to its own will, he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. One had to know that the Blood Ancestor had died many years ago. Her body had been split into several pieces and turned into several realms, but a drop of her precious blood had strangely survived. Could this be considered the Blood Ancestors' precious blood clone? Could this be considered a rebirth from a drop of blood? In his shock, Lu Yi quickly discovered something. The eyes of this precious blood clone weren't clear, and there was a sense of ignorance and chaos in them. He immediately understood that Feng Lao was right. Although the Blood Ancestors' precious blood had given birth to its own will, this will wasn't complete, and it was still in an ignorant state. It seemed that the Blood Ancestors' plan to use Blazing Heaven Skeleton and the blood chi of many first-generation blood race cultivators to create a body and descend here wasn't something she could complete. Blazing Heaven must have contributed to this. In the void, the figures of the Red Talisman Association and the Blood Servants stood still, all of them dumbfounded as they stared at the precious blood clone that had suddenly appeared. None of them knew what was going on or why a living being had suddenly appeared. No one dared to act rashly. Even though the precious blood clone didn't seem to be a threat, the great terror it had brought to everyone when it had descended just now still lingered. Amidst this silence, the precious blood clone suddenly turned its head and looked in a certain direction, where Zhou Ran was standing. With just a glance, Zhou Ran felt as if a great disaster was about to befall her, and her expression became extremely terrified. On the other hand, the precious blood clone's ignorant eyes were filled with doubt, as if it had seen something strange. Then, it stretched out its hand in Zhou Ran's direction and gently clenched it. A blood-red light burst out. End of this chapter. Chapter 1804. Zhou Ran, a late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator, had died just like that. The blood ancestor's precious blood clone clenched his fist and turned her into dust without any resistance. Her chi and blood drifted as if they were being drawn into the precious blood clone's body. Everyone felt their blood run cold when they saw this. No one had seen how the precious blood clone had done it. The moment she clenched her fist, no energy fluctuations had been released. However, Zhou Ran had still been squashed like an ant. This clearly didn't make sense. If the precious blood clone had displayed a powerful cultivator's radiance and killed Zhou Ran from a distance, it would have been understandable. However, what they saw just now didn't seem to be the case. Almost no one understood what had happened. Only Lu Yi had a faint insight into the truth. Zhou Ran was a first-generation blood race cultivator, and her divine nature came from the blood ancestor's precious blood clone. Therefore, when the precious blood clone descended, it could take away Zhou Ran's life. She was taking back her own power. Not only Zhou Ran, but all the blood warriors under Lu Ye's command were probably the same. This was because each of them had their own divine nature before Lu Ye's arrival. Just as Lu Yi thought so, the precious blood clone's gaze once again turned to the other blood warrior. When the blood warrior saw Zhou Ran's miserable end, he was terrified. He forcefully circulated his magic power and turned around to escape. However, it was too late. The blood ancestor's precious blood clone clenched his fist again, and the blood warrior of the mid-stage Moon Jade Realm followed in Zhou Ran's footsteps. Run! Lu Yi saw that the situation wasn't right and hurriedly shouted. In the face of the blood ancestor's precious blood clone, the blood warriors couldn't do anything. On the contrary, they would only increase her power. The only thing they could do now was to escape. Even Lu Yi himself hurriedly retreated as soon as he finished speaking. In the blink of an eye, figures scattered in all directions. When the surviving cultivators of the Red Talisman Association saw this, they didn't dare to stay any longer and scattered like birds and beasts. The precious blood clone's performance was too shocking, and they couldn't even think of fighting back. It wasn't that they weren't brave enough. They had persevered for so many years, and they had already proven their courage by fighting against Blazing Heaven. However, Blazing Heaven's ability couldn't be compared to Blazing Heaven's avatar. As he fled, Lu Yi clearly noticed that his blood warriors were dying one by one, and only a moment later, only the Xiangyin sisters remained. At this moment, the two sisters were like frightened rabbits, desperately trying to escape. They fled in the same direction as Lu Yi, because when Lu Yi shouted those words, they instinctively moved closer to Lu Yi, as if seeking some sense of security. However, they did not know that at this moment, even Lu Yi herself did not feel safe. "High Lord!" Xiangyin turned her desolate eyes towards Lu Yi, her face full of pleading. She had also noticed the deaths of the other blood warriors and knew that it would soon be her and her sister's turn. She also knew that in this situation, the Great Lord was at his wit's end, but at this moment of life and death, she still instinctively turned to Lu Yi. Lu Ye's fleeing figure suddenly came to a stop, and he rushed over to them, raised his hand, and hurriedly said, "Come in." As soon as this sentence was spoken, a strange portal suddenly appeared in the void. Xiangyin and Xianyu didn't hesitate at all, plunging headfirst into it and disappearing. Lu Yi quickly closed the portal, stood still, turned around, and looked back at the area where the blood ancestor's precious blood avatar was located. They couldn't escape. As Xiangyin and Xianyu were taken into the little flower world, Lu Yi clearly felt the precious blood avatar's gaze fall on him. She was undoubtedly aware that there was a strong divine attribute in her body. Staring at each other across the void, Lu Yi pushed his spirit chi to the limit to protect his body, his spiritual energy also surging fiercely. Spirit rune and divine rune defenses were madly constructed, layer upon layer. He didn't know if he could block the precious blood avatar's grasp, but he didn't want to sit still and wait for death. As he watched with rapt attention, the precious blood avatar raised his hand and gently clenched his fist. At this moment, Lu Ye's heart almost skipped a beat. However, he soon realized that he was fine. This was because he didn't feel anything abnormal, which meant that the precious blood avatar's absolute control of the divine attribute had no effect on him. Lu Ye let out a long breath, feeling as if he had just narrowly escaped death. However, he had expected this situation. When he was refining the blood ancestor's divine blood, the talent tree had burned away everything that was disadvantageous to him, leaving only what was useful to him. In other words, the brand that originally belonged to the blood ancestor had been refined by the talent tree, so although Lu Ye's divine attribute was still suppressed by the more powerful divine attribute, he was no longer subject to the blood ancestor's divine attribute like the blood warriors. This was the fundamental reason why he had been spared. In the distance, the blood ancestor tilted his head slightly with a puzzled expression. Obviously, he couldn't figure out why Lu Yi hadn't died like the other cultivators and was unscathed. However, the blood ancestor's ignorant spiritual intelligence didn't give her much ability to think, so when she saw that Lu Yi wasn't dead, she rushed towards him at an extremely fast speed. Lu Yi, who had just rejoiced at his narrow escape, realized that he was most likely doomed this time. He could ignore the precious blood avatar's control of the divine attribute, but if the precious blood avatar attacked him personally, there was nothing he could do. Even if the precious blood avatar couldn't display the blood ancestor's peak strength, even if it could only display 10% of it, it wasn't something Yu Yao could resist. As the precious blood avatar got closer and closer to him, Lu Yi suddenly caught a glimpse of a light from the corner of his eye. In the blink of an eye, the light arrived in front of him and hit the space he was in. The space around him rippled. At the same time, an old voice rang out in Lu Ye's ears. "Don't move." Lu Yi immediately recognized that it was Elder Feng's voice. He immediately stopped in his tracks and even retracted his magic power. The space around him distorted, and Lu Yi couldn't help but have an extremely strange feeling. It was as if he was in this world, but also as if he wasn't. The precious blood avatar rushed to a spot not far away from him. The precious blood avatar's puzzled expression became even more puzzled. It kept looking left and right as if it was looking for Lu Yi. However, Lu Yi was clearly standing not far in front of it. Lu Yi held his breath. He knew that the precious blood avatar had lost his position under Elder Feng's technique. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi understood what was going on. After all, Elder Feng was the origin consciousness. Since it was the origin consciousness, it naturally had a certain degree of control over the power of this world, just like how little Jiao could control the power of the 9 provinces. Although Feng Lao was suffering from the corrosion of the blood ancestor's precious blood and was unable to completely control this world like Little Nine, he could still interfere with the space at a critical moment and banish him into the depths of the space, helping him survive. Fortunately, the precious blood avatar's intelligence wasn't high. Otherwise, it could easily break Elder Feng's technique. After all, the blood ancestor's precious blood had been corroding this world for many years and had a certain degree of control over it. It could easily break this level of spatial banishment. In the location of the origin, where the Red Talisman Association's cultivators had set up a large formation to conceal it, light began to bloom and the origin's aura flowed out clearly. The precious blood avatar, who was looking for Lu Yi with a puzzled expression, immediately turned her head and looked in the direction of the origin. In the next moment, her figure flashed like lightning, like a shark that had smelled blood, and she rushed towards the origin. Her action of rescuing Lu Yi had undoubtedly exposed the origin. After countless years of struggle, the treasured blood clone had finally arrived here with the help of Blazing Heaven. His goal was nothing more than to erode the origin. That was the will that the blood ancestor had left in the treasured blood. It was the first thing that the treasured blood clone needed to do. She couldn't enter this space, so all of her corrosion of this world was superficial. Today, she had finally broken through the blockade with the help of Blazing Heaven's deployment. After sensing the Origin's aura, she naturally couldn't wait. In the blink of an eye, the precious blood avatar flew away. The power that had banished Lu Yi also disappeared at this moment. The moment the abnormality in the surrounding space returned to normal, Lu Ye's figure reappeared. Looking around, there was no one there. After this battle, everyone from St. Blood Peak had died, and the Red Talisman Association had also suffered heavy losses. In the end, it seemed that only a dozen or so people had survived. As for his own blood warriors, only Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin, who had been taken into the Little Flower World, had survived. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of using the Little Flower World in the beginning, but that the Blood Ancestor had acted too quickly. Even if he had used the Little Flower World at the beginning, he wouldn't have been able to save many blood warriors. Moreover, the size of the Little Flower World was limited. In just 2 days of fighting, Yu Yao had suffered more than 100 casualties, and Ri had fallen alone. This was definitely the second most tragic battle Lu Yi had ever participated in. The first was the battle outside the Four-Way Galaxy against the Insect and Blood Race armies. In that battle, even Ri had died several times. Lu Yi looked in the direction of the Origin again, but he couldn't see anything. There was no light, no aura, and he couldn't even detect the aura of the precious blood avatar. He wanted to see the situation over there, but he didn't dare to rush over casually. He could imagine that the Origin's consciousness should be fighting with the precious blood avatar at this moment. However, this kind of struggle wasn't a simple battle, but rather a contest on a deeper level. After thinking about it, Lu Yi sent out a message. After waiting for a while, Yang Ling and Hu Dequan led the remaining Red Talisman Association cultivators and rushed over to meet up with him. Seeing that Lu Yi was still alive, Yang Ling looked relieved. Just now, he had also fled. When he looked back, he saw the precious blood avatar chasing after Lu Yi. He had thought that Lu Yi would undoubtedly die, but who would have thought that he would survive? It could be said that he was lucky in the midst of misfortune. That woman, what is she? Hu Dequan still had some lingering fear, mainly because the deaths of the blood warriors under Lu Yi were too bizarre. Moreover, they had been in this world for many years, but they had never seen that woman. It was obviously unreasonable to say that St. Blood Peak had such a powerhouse. If that was the case, how could the Red Talisman Association have a foothold in this world? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.